ultimately, no, I can ask you the question. The question is ultimately is, can somebody strike somebody from the ballot and then somebody challenge that and then they go to court and they're like, seems like it's possible, you're off the presidential ballot. That would be insane.
So if Trump circumvents the Constitution slightly, not entirely, could you not make the case there's a consequentialist argument for that?
I feel like the arguments of nuclear war and everything would make it an even greater imperative for us to not have Donald Trump in office. Wouldn't you want somebody that adheres to the Constitution, that adheres to process, that adheres to rule of law? Wouldn't you want that person in more than anything else than a guy who literally says he wants to suspend the Constitution of the United States because of false allegations relating to election fraud? Wouldn't this literally be the most important time to have somebody who would defend his oath to the Constitution and not the time to throw that out completely and put in a raging narcissist? If I wasn't paying attention, how did I notice you laughing?
Might have lost Beardson too. Maybe he'll join later on. It's earlier for them. Anyway, let's get into it. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you guys for changing your schedules. Our topic today is going to be about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is facing 91 criminal charges across 4 jurisdictions. His trials are set to start in March, May, and the soonest is this year in October for Georgia, which is going to be televised. These indictments include several felony conspiracy charges, most of which include his plotting to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Outside these court proceedings, constitutional advocates, scholars, practitioners have begun to invoke Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to legally disqualify Trump from running for office again. This has inspired some states to look to their state secretary to apply the 14th Amendment and not allow Trump to be listed as a presidential primary candidate on ballots for failing to keep his oath when he was sworn into office in 2016 to uphold the Constitution. The country is polarized on it, but I want to ask you all, I'm not going to give you an introduction.
Hey, I'm Josiah with Pondering Politics. Yes, I do think that Trump failed to uphold the Constitution, and yes, as a matter of constitutionality, I do think he should be kept off the ballots. Though I will say I think there are practical ramifications to it that should be considered too.
And the white liberal destiny?
In my mind, the peaceful transfer of power is probably one of the most important aspects of adhering to the Constitution and being the leader of the United States. So trying to deliberately get in between that process, I would say, is probably one of the most egregious ways to fail upholding your oath to the Constitution.
Lauren De Laguna?
Yeah, I disagree. So the 14th Amendment has a disqualification only if you have engaged in insurrection or rebellion, which is why they have been using that key phrase, insurrection, since January 6th. However, they did a very poor job in meeting that point. I don't believe he will be charged successfully and convicted with insurrection, and so therefore in that sense, he didn't fail in upholding the Constitution, and furthermore, he shouldn't be on that alone be disqualified from being on the ballot. And furthermore, I think we're going to have a lot of practical issues if you disqualify him from the ballot beyond just like constitutionality.
Okay, and PFJung?
It's Young, but that's okay. Do I think that he didn't uphold the Constitution? Probably not. I believe he said the Constitution should be suspended at one point. So the answer is no, but I think he should be on the ballot, because to not have him on the ballot would be not intelligent. I think it would throw this country into civil disarray, even though perhaps you can make a legal case that he should not be on the ballot, but I think he should
and
be.
Just to clarify, you are correct. He said that after looking at the hit journalist piece that was the Twitter files. Okay, sorry for that. That was maybe a little biased of me. Go ahead, Pisco.
Yeah, he absolutely violated his oath of office numerous times throughout his presidency, not just election stuff. And of course, he should be kept off the ballot, no matter how intelligent you think it is to not apply the Constitution. The Constitution is the law, and it should be applied, and it clearly disqualifies him for office under the United States.
Okay, and I want you guys to just go right into it. The only thing that I ask, and this is a big thing I'm going to moderate, if you bring up Hunter Biden's cock or the laptop, it is a derailment. Okay, this is a very meaty topic, so That's all I ask.
The
you
cock
see
I
what you did
understand.
there.
But the laptop is relevant, right?
Is there anything
You-
that doesn't bring up Hunter Biden's cock? I mean, have you?
You think
looked
the
at
cock stuff
array
is
of
relevant?
women?
Coke and strippers are what bring
Less-
the cock up, apparently. So
Well, less about the cock stuff, but certainly the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story seems like it could be relevant.
I can't imagine how that would be relevant. I also can't imagine how the prudence or intelligence of it can be relevant. Shouldn't we apply the law? If the law is, and the Constitution says, that if you engage in insurrection, or if you engage in rebellion, or if you give aid to the enemies of the Constitution who engage in insurrection or engage in rebellion, if that's what the Constitution says, and you might disagree, as Lauren does, that that's what it says, or what Trump did qualifies for that, isn't that the only relevant thing to consider, whether or not the Constitution was violated in that section?
That's why I brought up earlier that if you want to say, really what this hinges on is whether or not Trump is guilty of insurrection specifically.
We say guilty,
I
mean
don't-
criminally guilty?
Right, criminally guilty.
What
like
makes
in
you think
amendment doesn't-
Section
theory-
3? What makes you
Whereas-
think Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is a criminal sanction?
it's explicitly not. Like, there's no language in the 14th Amendment which requires a conviction or trial. It's as
It
automatic.
specifically requires insurrection. So how would you want to prove insurrection other than a criminal finding? Like what burden does the state have to show for insurrection in order to bar?
There are other
someone from the ballot?
fact-finding processes that aren't criminal trials. There are,
Okay.
obviously different constitutional officers, whether they're constitutional officers in federal government or they're state executive branch officials or legislative branch officials, have their own fact-finding processes. If you're worried about, the lack of review, almost all these cases, in my mind, and by I think every legal reasoner's mind, would be challengeable in federal court. And so he'll have his day in court. It'll be reviewed, but the facts are clear.
Yeah,
So
it's a
what-
disqualification as utterly as being like a 24-year-old Canadian resident or Canadian citizen. It basically joins those qualifications as well. Those don't have to be adjudicated.
No, I understand that. But what I'm trying to say is Pisco's trying to lower the burden of proof that is required by making, yes, don't give me that face.
What's the burden of proof that's required for X?
Right now,
Lower
you're saying if you don't think it should be a criminal level, then you're saying it shouldn't be beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well, what I'm saying is your incorrect assumption, and the implicit assumption is that it should be a criminal, and I don't have any reason to think that it should be. Why should it be?
It should be because we should be applying the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt in order to exclude somebody from the ballot.
Is the impeachment clause in the Constitution, does that require a criminal conviction to have impeachment process?
But the impeachment process is explicitly written out in the Constitution, whereas this is just
Right.
the 14th Amendment simply cites have engaged in insurrection or rebellion. So what
Right.
level
Even more
of,
evidence that no particular procedures are required. For the treason clause in the Constitution, as I'm sure you're aware, there's particular procedures that are spelled out. In the impeachment clause, there's particular procedures that are spelled out. Even more reason when no particular procedures or burden of proof or any level thereof is either stated or implied, that you shouldn't read one into it, originalist.
Okay. So what level would you like to apply to? You just want like a committee of Congress people or senators, and the reason that I would assume that it would be a criminal procedure is because there isn't one explicitly written out, whereas for the other procedures in which you're detailing, there's an explicit procedure.
That doesn't make sense
constitutionally
either,
written
Lauren,
out.
because I mean there are a lot of disqualifications that where you wouldn't imply a criminal level burden of proof or procedure. There's qualifications related to the number of years old you are. There are qualifications of being a natural born
That's
citizen.
explicitly written out.
Do you imply criminal proceedings and levels and burdens of proof in those qualifications?
Those are explicitly written in the Constitution.
But so is this. That's
Wait,
why
wait,
I'm
yeah, the
confused.
14th.
This simply says have engaged in insurrection or rebellion. So who's to determine
Or given
the
aid or
level?
comfort to
Wait, hold on, real
Lauren-
quick. Wait, real quick. When we say explicitly written in the Constitution, is there a difference between something being an amendment versus something being in the original Constitution?
No.
So what
Okay,
we're
so all
talking
of this
about,
is explicitly in the Constitution. So I guess the question is, because what Pisco brought up is like, do we need like a criminal burden of proof for being like a citizen of the United States or for being 35 years old? Like, does this ever like go to court? Or because if not for that, why couldn't there be a similar standard or a different way of review for the things about aiding enemies of the state or engaging in like an insurrection?
so I don't know how there could be like a criminal, or sorry, I don't know how there could really be a proceeding to determine age, right? Age is just such a concrete fact. You either aren't a certain age or
you don't think that there could be questions about age where there would be factual issues that relevant about when you were born, or let's say about the
Oh, no, wait, hold on.
circumstances
I'm
of
sorry.
birth?
Let's just use Obama as an example. Donald
Obama? I
Trump
was about to go there.
challenged Obama's citizenship multiple times for years in the United States, and that would be a direct disqualifier as
factual
well.
question.
Yeah.
There were also questions about Ted Cruz's legitimacy when he ran for the presidency in 2016 as well. These things had to be determined by those state election officials and officers who are responsible for putting names on a ballot. These
are more fact-finding committees and not legal arguments and legal. So when we were discussing, Destiny, when you mentioned, I'm sorry, when you mentioned like if it's here, I'm just gonna go on mute for a second.
Yeah, that's Roger Stone.
Bring him on. It's Roger Stone. It's Trump
I wanna
trying
make an
to find me
affirmative case,
11,780 ballots, Lauren.
I'm accused a lot of just doing this question stuff, and so I want to give an affirmative case. I think these questions about, is it self-executing, is it still enforced? I'm glad we're not talking about whether or not this only applies to Civil War era stuff, but I think that those are more boring questions, as is the question of prudence. If it's in the Constitution, he should be disqualified from office if he fulfills the standard, and we haven't demonstrated that he fulfills the standard yet. Those of us on the standard being having engaged in insurrection or
given aid
rebellion,
and
comfort to the enemies of the Constitution. That is people who have also engaged in
That
insurrection or
doesn't answer
rebellion.
the question. Like, is it beyond a reasonable doubt? Is it what? And then are you saying is it just a conferment of a committee? So what Destiny said earlier, like whether or not it's explicitly written, well, for impeaching a president, that process is explicitly written. For determining whether or not somebody has engaged in insurrection or rebellion, that process is not explicitly written in the Constitution.
Happy to explain it, yeah.
And so people would assume, the average person would assume, that when you're talking about meeting the level of determining insurrection or rebellion, that would be a criminal level. And you're saying that this could just be determined by a group in Congress or in the Senate, or I don't know, and that's not written in the Constitution, so I don't understand how you would come to that finding.
Yeah, so like as we've already sort of brought up the examples, I think that break your assumption that there ought to be a default standard for every qualification in the Constitution. I guess when it's convenient that it should be done in a criminal process. I just don't know from where you're drawing that legal principle. Maybe.
Okay, wait. Hold on. Let me ask a question. This is cutting through all the bullshit. Okay, so the problem, Pisco, and this is what I don't understand. Okay, is Biden goes to run for president, and somebody says, actually, Biden aided an insurrection when he supported BLM. So. How do we determine the factualness of this? How do we? What is the body? Who has the standing? Where is the review happening? What? Yeah. Oh, yeah. What is it? That's what I'm curious about.
Yeah. So Article 6 of the Constitution requires that every official in the United States, either under state or federal office, swear an oath to the United States Constitution. They're all bound by the Constitution, and they have to enforce the Constitution, right? Just like every official in the United States.
Hold on, wait. You're not even close to answering my question.
To answer the question.
Okay, all right.
The question.
You're not even close to it.
Has to enforce the Equal Protection Clause of the United States, whether or not there's a criminal process, civil process, whatever. In the case of specifically disqualification proceedings, there are a number of different ways in which Section 3 of the 14th Amendment can be enforced. The most simple way would be through an impeachment proceeding, right? That didn't work, but that in terms of the specific charges levied in the Trump impeachment, but that would be a way to enforce Section 3.
Okay, but I thought earlier, didn't we literally?
I'm not done.
Okay.
I'm not done.
Well, no, hold on. No, stop. Wait, hold on. Because you just took like 3 minutes to give the. You could have literally just said.
No, that wasn't 3 minutes. That was.
You could have just said. You could have just said.
You did ask him a question, so shouldn't he get the answer?
Yeah, but he didn't. Okay, go for it.
Yeah, so impeachment, secretaries of state who are in charge of determining qualifications on their ballots, doing it for themselves. And when that decision is ultimately and inevitably challenged by Joe Biden, let's say if he's being disqualified for, I don't know, giving assistance to Black Lives Matter, in your hypothetical, that would be challenged in federal court. There would be an evidentiary hearing in the trial court that would be ultimately appealed up to the Supreme Court.
So now
as we do all these issues.
Now it is criminal level. So now
That's
it is
not
criminal.
I'm sorry. What part of what I just said was criminal?
So it is a civil proceeding then.
So yeah, it'll be a civil.
Okay.
So we're going.
It's a proceeding in court.
Yes, it will be reviewed in court. in federal court. If the state
wait, and it's a preponderance of evidence to disqualify somebody from running for the president of the United States.
I mean, that standard of proof, you're asking what is the burden of proof related to engaging in insurrection. That's a question ultimately that, the courts are going to have to come to a conclusion on. I would say probably preponderance of the evidence. That would be my standard. I would imply I would say a less interesting question than, is this even justiciable at all? And do people have to enforce Section 3 as written or not? That's the question you have to ask. Those are legal questions. Some people might say, beyond a reasonable doubt, like Lauren says. I think that this would clearly fit that standard no matter what. And so I'm comfortable in the facts, but that's kind of a subsidiary
beyond
and
that,
not super helpful
beyond
question.
that, I was just going to say that even though the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is self-executing, it doesn't preclude additional legislation coming from Congress or the states that provide a mechanism or a process by which you would adjudicate it. It's just saying that in the absence of that, you can still appeal to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. So it may very well be the case that Trump's eligibility for the presidency is challenged, either because Secretary of State kicks him off the ballot because they're looking at it in Michigan and New Hampshire potentially doing just that, and Arizona as well. Or in a red state, they choose to keep him odd, and citizens can challenge that. And then through the course of the proceeding, it may very well be that states adopt a process by which to make that determination state by state by state. Or maybe the Supreme Court will come up with some sort of process that's required for all 50. I don't know. But just because there's no process now doesn't mean there won't be one.
I just have a question for Pisco. So if Trump hypothetically were found not guilty by a jury of his peers to have engaged in insurrection or rebellion, and let's assume, just for hypothetical
Not guilty.
sake,
I don't know. What are you saying? Where?
So isn't he
being charged
being charged with insurrection right now?
No, he's not.
He is not.
So
what you're thinking of, Lauren, is the Capitol riot is looked at as part of the means to the conspiracy charge that he is facing. So he's not facing a charge for inciting.
If he is found not guilty, okay, in
of
all
what?
criminal proceedings against him.
Of the classified documents case, you think that's relevant?
If somebody wants to use that as evidence of rebellion or engaging in helping the foreign enemies, or if anyone wants to use any of these criminal proceedings as proof that he is engaging in insurrection or anything.
Too loose. You have to be more narrow. Specify the crime. Specify the charge that you're talking about. What kind of thing you're talking about. I can just short circuit this all. Whatever you're going to talk about, everything he's charged with are not the same things as engaging in insurrection or rebellion or giving aid, comfort to enemies thereof, as the 14th Amendment defines. So everything he's been charged with isn't going to be one-to-one to the standard of the 14th Amendment, if that's where you're going.
Why do you think? Okay, it may not.
There would be no preclusive effect of the decisions in the criminal trials to the 14th Amendment standard, if that's.
But there are criminal charges that a district attorney could have put against him for the act of would be considered one-to-one with insurrection or rebellion.
No, not necessarily. As an originalist, we're taught that we're all originalists now, I guess. We're taught that the text as enacted in the time and what the words meant at the specific time of the enactment of any particular text is what's dispositive in any particular case. And so it could be the case that a lot of the things that say insurrection, the charges that say insurrection, weren't enacted at the same time, and therefore we're not going to import the same meaning that we would import to the 14th Amendment's definition of insurrection and rebellion.
I understand.
And so it's not the case that just because it says insurrection, it's going to be the same.
So you're saying there's literally no charges that could be put against Trump that would be similar enough to, therefore, if he's found guilty, meet the burden and exclude him based off the 14th Amendment.
I'm not saying that. It's conceivable that there could be a criminal charge.
It's like nailing donuts to a wall.
No. I'm answering your question. It's conceivable that there could be a criminal charge that roughly approximates this standard. So what?
Okay, perfect. And Trump has not been charged with any criminal.
I think explicitly they're avoiding those charges of anything related to like sedition or insurrection.
You're talking about incitement of insurrection. You're talking about insurrection itself. I mean, Trump wasn't literally holding guns. He didn't use force. So what are you talking about?
So you're saying that there is no district attorney that is charging him with any even similar or approximation to the one? Okay, all right. So don't you think that's a bit odd to then try to exclude him from the ballot if he's not even being charged with the potential crimes that would be used to preclude him from the ballot in the first place.
What I'm hearing from you is not strictly speaking a legal argument. You're saying, isn't it weird? Isn't it like, doesn't it feel odd? Isn't it not prudent given the fact that prosecutors are? I just want to be clear. What you're giving is not a legal argument. You're asking, isn't it weird? And my answer to that is the standards are what?
It seems, hear me out though. If you're trying to exclude someone from the ballot, but then you want to avoid having to meet a burden of proof because, like you said, he didn't have guns, he didn't have weapons. How are you going to charge him with?
No one said you're dodging a burden of proof. You just pulled that out of nowhere. No one says that you're dodging a burden of proof in whatever the relevant forum is, and almost certainly that would end up in civil court. Yeah.
Pisco, if you can answer, how does one get removed from the ballot? Like what is it going to look like to do that? Because I think what she's getting at, like, they have to prove something. No?
Yeah, different states. So the reason why this answer, even in the articles that are in support of it, they don't ever specify one particular pathway is because there's multiple and different states have different pathways. So in states in which the secretaries of state have to determine the qualifications of every candidate, think about it. Just like Stephen brought up the the age of a candidate, where they're from, where they're born, there are state officials that have to make decisions about whether they're qualified to be on the ballot, right? In terms of residence, there's obviously, you guys are aware of that, for federal legislative representatives, you need to be a resident of the state for a certain period of time. There
but doesn't that warrant a lot of what Lauren is bringing up, which, according to what you're saying, it sounds like, yes, there's precedent. Like, it makes sense for him to get removed from the ballot under the 14th Amendment. It's right there. But you know what? How it happens, it could change. It depends, And when there's no set standard, people are going to question the process.
State, so I would say in the main run of states, there are state secretaries of state who are in charge of elections in a given state. Agreed? Everyone seems to agree with that. They can be appointed, they can be elected. They make official decisions, official acts, either promulgated in rules or just decisions that have legal force. They'll exclude people from ballots for any number of reasons, in the past and moving forward. Secretaries of state often have that authority, right?
And so when a presidential candidate was excluded from the ballot for whatever reason,
for 14th Amendment purposes, I'm not aware of that.
Oh, wait, hold on, wait. Because you just said that you made it sound like willy-nilly any Secretary of State can just like strike somebody from the ballot.
When did I say
that seems to be because you just said for a variety of purposes, and then Lauren challenged you. Can you give one example of that happening? Now, I don't know, maybe it has, but I'm curious, has there been an example of a Secretary of State? So like in Florida, we've got DeSantis, he appoints secretary. Yeah, just saying like, sorry, you're not on the ballot right now. Has this happened in a presidential election?
For presidential candidates in the last 20, 30 years, I'm not aware of them. I'm not aware in the last 20 years.
Okay, because that sounds like to me, if that were to happen, that would be a major.
I can get you disqualified. If what you're going on here is whether or not it's ever been the case that Secretary of States have made qualification decisions in the past, you're not going to have a good day. That's not going to be a good argument. There are people in states that have qualification responsibilities to make sure that everyone who's on the ballot is qualified to hold that office. And for you to pretend, and for everyone here to sit and listen and pretend that's not the case, that people aren't being qualified.
No one's pretending that's not the case. It's just that
absurd.
No one is pretending that's not the case. It's just the issue. I think the issue is that earlier it seems like we kind of brushed over like, oh, well, there's a lot of different processes and blah 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 blah. But it feels like for literally removing somebody from the ballot, probably the most important part of that question is the process. That's probably more important than literally every other part of this question. And I don't know.
You're not hearing even.
Well, I'm hearing you.
Interested to hear.
Okay. Well, I'm hearing you, but the problem is you take like 5 minutes. So for 4.5 minutes of your answer, you're not talking about any. Well, no, wait. Let me be really clear. Wait. Really crystal clear. I can ask you a crystal clear question because you haven't answered anything so far, I don't think. So the crystal clear question is: somebody wants to say, let's say somebody says Biden aided and abetted BLM, and they attacked public institutions. I consider that to be a form of aiding an insurrection.
Let me finish. From the ballot.
Yeah. So what is the process by which people strike Biden from the ballot?
DeSantis has appointed Secretary of State, assuming this is the law in Florida.
Yep, it is. They're appointed.
Putting these caveats.
Yep.
But I don't know if he's the qualification person in Florida. He says Biden engaged in insurrection and rebellion. He's gone from the ballot.
Yes.
You think that's the end of the question? What did I say would happen as soon as that occurs and he takes an official act as against Biden?
It sounds like you
litigated.
said then multiple parties would have standing then to sue the state. Like a citizen or a voter would be able to sue the state.
Of course.
Okay, but then the question, we've already...
Who probably sues, Stephen? Wait, Stephen, who probably sues?
It could be the party, it could be the voters, it could be the candidate,
How about
it could
Joe
be...
Biden?
Yeah,
How
the
about
candidate,
Joe Biden?
yes. Yeah.
Joe Biden sues,
Sure.
who does he sue?
I imagine he would sue the
Sues
state of
Secretary
Florida,
State.
or he would sue the
We're
Secretary
allowed
of
to
State.
do that.
Sure.
So, as Lauren just went to law school, she learned all about exceptions to state sovereign immunity. She knows all about ex parte.
I don't know why you're bringing up anything having to do with Lauren. We're just talking to say
She's
words,
aware,
but go ahead.
She's aware.
We don't. I don't care what she's aware of.
There's not going to be jurisdictional issues here.
When I don't care. No,
no.
why are we talking about this? It's not jurisdictional that we care about. What we care about is what is going to be the burden at the end of the day. Because you made it sound like a preponderance of evidence is an. Okay, never mind. You just want to say like so much without saying anything. You're not talking about anything that's interesting. What we want to know is no. Here, ultimately, no. I can ask you the question. The question is ultimately is can somebody strike somebody from the ballot and then somebody challenge that and then they go to court and they're like, seems like it's possible. You're off the presidential ballot. That would be insane. That would be a crazy standard to strike somebody from a ballot, and you seem unwilling to engage with the meat of that question.
Wait. Did you hear me say the words that there would be an evidentiary hearing and evidence would be
yes,
put on in a trial
specifically
court?
heard you say. I specifically heard you say earlier that something like a preponderance of evidence would be adequate to strike somebody from the presidential ballot. I heard you say that. Hold on. Did you say that or did I hear that? Am I making that up?
Did
anybody else in here hear him say that? Am I making that up?
I would say what I told you, Steve.
Stop arguing.
I would put the standard of proof that's typical in civil cases. With respect, which is usually preponderance of evidence in civil court, but I would say that that's an ancillary illegal question.
How is that ancillary?
You're asking about who's the fact finder, right? The question of what the burden of proof is for that particular fact finder is a different question than who the fact finder is.
It is, but I think both the fact finder and the burden of proof are really important. Are they not?
Yeah. Would you not be comfortable with a preponderance of evidence standard? With respect to the 14th Amendment?
I don't think so. Personally, no.
Would you be comfortable with a preponderance of evidence standard? That is to say, if a court determines by a preponderance of evidence that Barack Obama was born in Kenya, do you think he should be able to be on the ballot?
I don't think a preponderance of evidence is good enough there. To remove somebody's...
Let me ask that question again for you, Stephen. If a court finds by a that is more than 50% that Obama was born in Kenya, okay. I think that's insane, but we can have disagreements. Fine. I will even grant you that it would be fine for me beyond a reasonable doubt, and I'm happy to concede that that's what the standard of proof should be in the federal courts. Whatever. To me, that's the not as important question as is Section 3 self-executing? Is it enforced, and does it apply? And can we finally apply these facts? Because right now, all we're talking about is procedures where it seems the only disagreement with you, Stephen, is whether it's beyond a reasonable doubt or, I don't know, clear and convincing evidence or preponderance.
You make that sound like it's insignificant, but like we can take Trump himself. The difference between him being civilly convicted of rape and whatever is way different than a criminal conviction of rape, right?
It's overdetermined because with every burden of proof, the facts of this case meet out the 14th Amendment, Section 3.
I agree.
And so this
100%.
question to me is less interesting.
Okay, I agree, but hold on. The reason why the question is interesting because when we talk about this, at least the lens that I view it, I don't actually care about Trump. I'm not thinking about Trump. What I'm thinking about is in the future when Republicans have power and they and say Kamala Harris wants to run for president, and they say Kamala Harris bailed out protesters that were attacking police officers that take an oath to the Constitution. Mm-hmm. She's taking an oath to the Constitution. Why the should she be allowed to run for president when she's literally, by dollar value, aiding and abetting enemies to the state?
Different question. So you realize why your question is different.
Tell me why.
Your question is now about what does it mean to engage in insurrection or rebellion and give aid or comfort to the enemies of the Constitution. Different question than the burdens.
Okay, I'm retarded.
Question.
I don't see how it's a different question at all. I don't think I have the IQ.
Okay,
that seems like
to me,
that seems like no. We're not talking about evidentiary standard. That seems like the exact same type of question as it is with Donald Trump. Okay, I just don't understand.
Between the two of you, what you are doing, Pisco, what you're both doing is deciding what piece of evidence you want to look at and scrutinize for this 14th Amendment application, and neither of you are bringing up the definitive thing that a lot of lawyers have cited, which would be him abandoning his oath to uphold the Constitution.
No, we agree that abandoning the oath is bad. I think the question that I have, and I think Lauren has, is like, who's making that determination? Who's the fact-finding?
Your fear that you're bringing up, because it now feels like Pisco's outnumbered. Your fear that you're bringing up is, oh my God, what if they can use it when they're in power? Where most people are looking at it, they can prove it, and they're thinking, what the fuck is this if the citizens are not going to uphold the Constitution as it is? Do you worry about that?
Well, I just worry about who's making the determination. If, like, the answer ultimately is, well, ultimately, in the matters of the presidential election, it's probably always going to be the Supreme Court that is ultimately making the determination or whatever, then I'd probably be okay with that. Now, I'm retarded. I don't know, does the Supreme Court ultimately determine matters of, like, factual,
they're not going to be
like,
the fact finder.
I don't know how that works with the Supreme Court.
It'll be some trial court. It'll be heavily litigated. Everyone will be in the, they'll have their chance to put on their evidence. It'll be an incredibly important trial. Or evidentiary hearing at the very least, in terms of if you're talking about injunctive relief or anything like that. So there's gonna be evidence. It's gonna be weighed. Either it's gonna be weighed by these federal courts, that are reviewing state secretaries of state decisions or state official decisions, or it's going to be done through congressional legislators. Because remember, this doesn't just apply to the president. It applies to previous legislators as well. Anyone who previously taken an oath. And so there's different procedures for different levels of government official. And so that's why Ruben and I are hedging, because the process for being qualified for a state office is different for the president. If you're just focusing on the president, my guess is the most likely channels that would come through is federal court through a state official act, or through congressional action by way of impeachment.
So does this mean, like, let's say we've got 50 states, let's say 24 strike you from the ballot. Is that then 24 individual court cases that you've got to chase through the states and the circuits?
Probably not, because there'll probably be one consolidated evidentiary case, and whatever, when there's a determination that a federal court determines that he engaged in insurrection or rebellion.
Wait, would it ever go? And I just don't understand the change. Would it go to a federal court?
How would any one court get the jurisdiction
Yeah.
to have the consolidated case in their jurisdiction?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking now about questions of case management. There's a lot of as you're aware, because I'm sure you took complex litigation and things like that, there's multi-district litigations. Usually, there can be situations in which courts collaborate on having a single forum to resolve disputes, or there could be forum shopping, which I know you're very
You're sure
averse
that
to.
I took complex litigation? Is that even a requirement for law school, or is that just an added
probably
class
not. I'm
that
just,
you had
I'm,
at
I'm
your
just
school?
talking shit. I'm just talking shit.
I did
So,
not.
in the case of any particular federal court coming to that determination, that will be appealed ultimately to the Supreme Court, and that will probably have binding effect, and you'll probably need to go into the trial. As a procedural matter, you'll probably need to go into every state and show them, res judicata, the preclusive effect of the Supreme Court's decision there, but that would probably be binding based on the facts.
And for what it's worth, it's not just Pisco and I who are hedging. Even those who are like scholars who are like proponents of the Section 3's applicability to Trump, they even say that it raises all kinds of questions about the mechanisms and procedures and its potential for abuse. So this is why they also think, like in unanimity, that it has to be litigated by the Supreme Court to stand like the best chance of precluding these things.
This isn't like the boring. I think these are the boring questions, because I think these are all easily answered. And the question, like the alternative world that I guess Lauren wants, is where no one has to enforce Section 3. And in fact, right now as it stands, no one can. I mean, that's the world that you're presenting us. How would Section 3 be enforced?
If someone were charged with the crime of insurrection or rebellion, or I know that you're saying that it's not one-on-one to the constitutional, or a similar crime in which somebody could arguably say would fall under insurrection or rebellion or aiding a foreign enemy, then I could see, it being enforced and okay, this is concrete evidence. So like the other requirements, such as age, living as being 35 years old to be president, living in the United States for 14 years, being a natural born citizen, these are all facts, like hard concrete facts, which a fact-finding committee can do, not really a legal issue. Whereas whether or not somebody has engaged in insurrection, I would say that is that's more based on legal analysis and application of facts than it is just
agreed that it's a more complicated.
So therefore, having an actual charge and being convicted of a crime, then having that as the fact to lay on, so the Secretary of State could say, oh, this person has actually been charged with this crime, so therefore I should exclude them, or they're not 35 years old, so therefore I should exclude them from the ballot. Those would be concrete things that I think the Secretary of State would be able to look at and actually make that decision based off of. But if they're just making this decision based off their head, like, oh, well, yeah, they're 36 years old, they've lived in the country for over 14 years, and they're natural born citizen, but in my opinion, they've engaged in insurrection, that I don't.
You don't like that. That's what you're saying.
To be fair,
I'm not that I wouldn't like that. It sounds like it's not the intention of the founding fathers, or even not even the founding fathers, but the intention of the drafters of the 14th Amendment.
I believe it is going to be like cases or arguments brought to the Secretary of State. So it's not just going to be the Secretary of State making, like, on a whim. Making
no, but like,
decision,
let's say,
is my understanding.
In the current state right now, so you're going to have secretaries of state who are determining whether or not to put Trump on the ballot. So
And
in
they're
that
only
situation,
doing that
if he has
because
not
there are
been charged,
lawyers making the cases to them.
Yeah, but when you say making the case, what we're asking, I think, is just like, what is that process? Like, is this going to be like a criminal trial in a case? Is it going to be a civil trial in a case where Donald Trump is going to bring a legal team and they're going to present back and forth?
What you are asking for is that the people who wrote the Constitution, that they didn't think it through, because what they put for Section 3 is not something that makes sense to you guys for public confidence.
I don't even know what the structure of our government was when Section 3 was drafted, when the 14th Amendment came about.
Stephen, that's a great thing to bring up, because I think one of the ways we can get to how this was meant to be used is to look at how it was used at the time. And my question for Lauren is, do you think that the people who were disqualified under Section 3 after the Civil War were charged? All of them were charged with insurrection?
I believe the majority of them were charged.
No.
And also the Civil War had a very interesting... after the Civil War, both the Confederate side and the national side attempted to, make amends, bridge the divide. There's a lot of memorial services.
That's fine.
So I would
that's not
imagine
relevant.
in
yes.
the process of doing such and bringing two halves of the country together, they would attempt not to charge people who were engaged in what
they were still disqualified.
A legitimate
they were
battle at the time.
People were disqualified for speaking out.
And also, they would need the Southern leader. They wouldn't want to prevent all of the Southern leaders who maybe were engaged in rebellion to be excluded from office, because that would ostracize the South even further.
I think that's exactly what happened, though, right?
It's just previous oath takers. It's just previous oath takers. And so previous oath takers, they were disqualified. And they had to pass a law. They had to pass a law pursuant to Section 3, the second sentence of Section 3, that gave immunity from Section 3 to previous people. But in the interim, before they decided to give to wipe the slate clean, there were people disqualified under Section 3, and it wasn't pursuant to some criminal conviction. And so how can you sit here and say, well, I know what the framers thought of this section, and they must have meant you need a criminal conviction based on some law that kind of approximates, I think, in my mind, insurrection and what's that?
Give an example.
Or can't we even on this, like, isn't this like a more simple question? Isn't this like the age question?
I want an example so that I can know
wait.
So
hang on.
Hold on, Pisco.
Hold
on. I want an example because I want to know the process that this person went through from being disqualified from the ballot and how they were excluded from the ballot and what that looked like in the
So if
process.
I give you some, I just want to be clear. If I give you some contemporary examples of people being disqualified without criminal convictions of insurrection and rebellion, you will agree that a criminal conviction is not required for Section 3? Is that what you're saying?
Sure.
All right.
I want to know and also, is it a state?
I'm about to grab
Are
it.
you disqualified from running from president? Because that's a completely different qualification than like a state office.
Is president an officer of the United States? Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it says very clearly, no person shall hold any office under the United States, or be an officer of the United States, who had previously given an oath and have engaged in insurrection. So obviously it applies to presidents, right?
Yes.
So I don't know why you bring up the distinction between president and non-president.
Okay, I'm asking. I didn't make any. I'm asking for a specific example of somebody who ran for president, okay, and was excluded from the ballot.
Why would they have had to run for president if we're analyzing what the procedure is for anybody?
Because the ability to be president has different requirements than almost every other officer of the United
Okay,
States.
but the disqualification
and
clause
the
is
way
equal.
the way in which the structure of the presidency is created is exclusively under the Constitution, which is why people feel as though so there is a federal statute, 18 USC section 2071, and that excludes any officer who's engaged in certain white-collar crimes from becoming an officer of the United States. However, people have looked at this recently and determined it might be an overbroad statute because it would
That's
also
a law. It's not a
include-
constitution. I mean, are you going to say the Constitution is not constitutional? I mean, it's different. The 14th Amendment is by definition.
It's an overbroad statute, which people have determined to potentially be unconstitutional, because if it were upheld, then it would exclude certain people from running for president. However, the office of president is exclusively determined by the Constitution due to supremacy clause. And so, therefore, people think that the office of president is distinctly different because of its constitutional protections, which is why
The disqualification clause makes no mention. I thought we were textualists. The disqualification clause makes no difference in how you treat disqualification as to senators, legislatures, and
The two of you
clause,
are
though.
I could listen to you guys go back and forth so much about this, but I do kind of want to rope other people in. I do believe you guys could split hairs over this for a while, and I think other lawyers will continue to do it, so maybe this will be a nice specific lawyer panel topic for one of these. I want to ask, though, if we're looking at it, we're taking a step back and looking at it a bit more broader. Some people are saying the criminal cases against Trump, the convictions, that these are things that he should be, what is it called, when the president lets him off free. I'm lost in words right now. Yeah, that he should be pardoned. That he should be pardoned. And my question is, when we look at him not being on the ballot, we are being told that this is a risk because it could be January 6th in 50 different states, that this would cause riots in 50 different states. Part of the reason people don't want him to be removed from the ballot is because they would like the healthy result of the American people choosing not to have him as president. Is this responsible?
I think so. Chaeiry, I think you put it so perfectly. I agree with you. It's very responsible.
You think it's responsible? Which one?
I think it's responsible to let the American people choose and not just do all this lawyer mumbo jumbo nerd shit. I'm not a textualist, by the way. I'm Episcopalian. So I think it's more interesting to discuss the. Huh?
Is
you don't care about applying the Constitution? If the Constitution says one thing,
that's pescatarian.
You don't care about it, right? Like, who cares what the law is, right?
Well, let's talk about it more broadly. Well, hold on. Why should we care so much about what the Constitution says when Thomas Jefferson said the Constitution should be written every 75 years and it was written by slave owners?
We have, just to be clear, we have nothing if we don't have the Constitution. It is literally the backbone to every single part of the structure of our government. So to say fuck the Constitution would be similar in a philosophy argument to saying fuck like propositional logic or fuck 1 + 1 = 3.
I don't think so. No.
Wait, where does anybody draw any authority or any right to do any action from if the Constitution is null and void?
Well, first off, the Constitution does not contain all of the objective answers within it. As Pisco said about textualists versus originalists, there's different subjective interpretations you apply to an objective text. So the Constitution, in and of itself, doesn't have the answers. It's the interplay.
We have one body right now that ultimately determines answers relating to the Constitution, and that's the Supreme Court. My understanding is there are not competing visions of what the law means, and if there are, at some point, ultimately, that makes its way to the Supreme Court.
There are not competing visions between what the law means.
He's saying they're resolvable. He's saying that they're ultimately resolved by the Supreme Court to the extent they're resolved. I think it's a little bit of a simplification, but it's not far off. And ultimately, it's odd to hear you complain about Trump talking about, suspending the Constitution in one breath, but then also be like, you know what? I don't care what it says.
Well,
Thomas Jefferson said this thing, so will.
I am a centrist, so I have no principles. I'm just trying to echo the arguments of the best version of people that I may or may not agree with. But I only
want to talk to you if it's your opinion. I don't want to hear you like.
I'm still figuring out my opinion. I'm testing the arguments that have been used against me, against you guys who are far smarter than I am. So if it is the case that the Constitution is not a metaphysically foundational document that is perfect in every way, which I don't think anyone would suggest it is, like, okay, let's say Trump violates the Constitution. Sure. Is there any sort of consequentialist argument for, well, maybe if he violates the Constitution, but he fights back against the Biden crime family, then it's worth it? Or he gets us out of the neocon war in Ukraine and stops us from risking nuclear war. Is there not any argument at all to be had there?
I don't think you can have
so.
If we don't have, not to sound like a conservative, but if we don't have rule of law, we have nothing, right? We literally have nothing if we can't appeal to, at the end of the day, to some law or legal procedure. It can't just be if this guy fights hard enough, or if all the conservatives in all the states are going to rebel and have a civil war, then I guess we have to let him break the law. That's an insane position to take, because then you're just encouraging people to basically break shit hard enough so that ultimately we have to let anybody do anything. Otherwise, people are going to, throw a riot? That's insane.
Not necessarily.
I'll say this.
Go ahead,
hang
Josiah.
on. So, Paul, so
spout your nonsense.
To me, it's an interesting question to like pitch it as like a utilitarian argument or consequentialist argument. I'm actually open to that as just like a just philosophy, but I think it would require the concession that you are deliberately ignoring the Constitution to achieve what you think is a greater good. I would not entertain any pro-Trump argument that did not begin with that preamble. Like, yeah, the Constitution's pretty clear, he's fucked, but we want to ignore it because we think the consequences would be too profound. I would be interested in that argument because we actually have, throughout the history of the United States, everybody's favorite president, I use him all the time, Abraham Lincoln, engaged in acts of non-acquiescence where he ignored Supreme Court precedent.
Yeah, there we go.
Good.
Trump is Lincoln.
But again, unless it begins with a preamble, like, yeah, that's just a question because we know he's fucked.
Fine.
Yeah.
I will not go down the Constitution was written by slave owners and everyone on this panel is white and therefore I can just use your privilege against you.
But then the question becomes, Paul.
What was that? What did that one guy say when he was talking to Kenny's? Your white presenter.
That one guy is trying to say something else. But what about the? Where's your limiting
with.
principle?
No, not you. Okay.
Where's your limiting principle? Because couldn't
First generation America, homie.
Couldn't the basis by which you would want to ignore the Constitution in this case, like, also be used to apply to any other law? Because if we're willing to set aside the Constitution,
sure, it's case by case. Like, hold on. You said Lincoln. What was it? Acquiesced?
Non-acquiescence.
Non-acquiescence. He did not acquiesce to the Constitution's request, as per Barbarossa, and he moved past it. And there was a case to be made that at the time that was the right move. So could a case not be made that we are in such a strange time politically? And, like, okay, one potential argument is we're risking nuclear war with Russia. So if Trump, circumvents the Constitution slightly, not entirely, but slightly, could you not make the case there's a consequentialist argument for that?
I feel like the consequentialist argument, if you break apart like what we're really talking about, I feel like the arguments of nuclear war and everything would make it an even greater imperative for us to not have Donald Trump in office. Wouldn't you want somebody that adheres to the Constitution, that adheres to process, that adheres to rule of law? Wouldn't you want that person in more than anything else than a guy who literally says he wants to suspend the Constitution of the United States because of false allegations relating to election fraud? Wouldn't this literally be the most important time to have somebody who would defend his oath to the Constitution and not the time to throw that out completely and put in a fucking raging narcissist?
Well, if it's Trump versus Biden, and Biden, who I think we all agree is...
I'm probably not going to agree with whatever you're going to say, but go ahead.
Not all there. Not all there.
Whatever not all there Biden is, there's way more of him there than Trump is. So
really?
Yes,
No.
really,
Trump?
fucking
No
really.
way.
100%.
Look,
Yeah.
Trump.
I'm so glad that I finally
let's be honest.
did
Trump
that.
could probably hit the treadmill. That's for sure. But Biden. Okay, all right. All right, hold on. I'll save that Yu-Gi-Oh card for a minute.
What are you even saying? I mean,
Talking
like, yeah,
about-
stretch.
Hold on.
stretch
Biden
to
is
its
the one.
limits.
Biden is the one advocating for further involvement in Ukraine. Trump is his number one platform is getting out of Ukraine. Could that not be a valid argument to say, hey, yes, normally, obviously, the Constitution should be followed all the time. Again, many founding fathers suggested that it should be rewritten every 75 years, and it hasn't been at all. It's a little bit out of date. Certainly, I suspect some people on here do not adhere to the Constitution completely in regards to the Second Amendment, in that every possible firearm should be legal. So there is an argument potentially that the risk of nuclear
Including
war
nukes?
outweighs. Yeah.
Paul, the
Yeah,
reason
okay.
I disagree with you is, so I want to agree with you because your argument leads to Trump being in office, and you're saying that he's better at handling the Russia situation. The reason I
Lauren, that's
disagree
bad.
with you,
You don't say I want to
because
agree with you.
America-
because of where you
I
end
applaud
up.
the honesty,
I
man.
disagree with you though is because America has gone through times where we have like suspended the Constitution in times of war, where we haven't considered the Constitution.
Lauren?
So, for instance, during World War II, when we put Japanese people in internment camps,
There was a Supreme Court case that
and it was a
that
Supreme
said that
Court
that was
case.
okay. You
No,
might not agree.
I
I
would
mean,
say-
I don't agree with it, but that just was the law.
That
of
just
the
goes to
land.
show you that morality is more important than law, and the fundamental issue here is more of a moral one than a legal
How
one.
do we have a society
No,
based
the
on
Supreme Court case was whether or not the person was the people who put the people in the internment camps were
It was racial based.
criminally liable.
It was racial. It was racial
Let's
based.
not get sucked down
Who
the
cares?
Right,
internment rabbit
and they
hole.
determined that it wasn't racially based; that it was because of the time of
No,
war.
it was absolutely racially based.
Hey, can I
What is it?
answer
What-
a quick question of Lauren's that she asked like 10 minutes ago? Okay, so Lauren, you asked a really good question about 10 minutes ago, and I didn't have the answer on hand. So while you all were debating back and forth, I went and Googled it, and I'll send you the link. But I think you asked a question of, in the aftermath of the Civil War and after the ratification of the 13th Amendment, or the 14th Amendment rather, what was the process by which ex-Confederates were disqualified from office? And so there's a good article written by the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington said, Section 3 adjudicants against former Confederates were rare in the aftermath of the Civil War. This because it was widely understood that former Confederates who took an oath to support the Constitution before the Civil War were disqualified, and therefore many didn't even seek office again because they knew it applied to them. In fact, ex-Confederates flooded Congress with thousands of amnesty requests to remove their Section 3 disqualification. So most of them just didn't run for re-election again because they understood at the time that it
Some
applied to
did.
them.
But hang on.
Sorry,
Hang on.
to
But
remove-
There were 8. I found a few. Maybe Pisco found more, and most of
more.
them were decided. The ones that I found in this article were adjudicated by state supreme courts.
Hold on, to remove their disqualification, though, that means they had to have previously been charged with something.
No,
to-
it
No,
doesn't.
they
That's
understood.
your assumption. That's wrong.
Hold on,
They
Pisco.
weren't charged.
I'm not talking to you, Pisco. Isaiah, what was originally on their record to be removed?
No, there was no conviction of anything because again they understood that the disqualification applied to them just as much as if they were not 35 years old or a natural born citizen. So they appealed to Congress. Hey, I don't have what the formal amnesty request was, but they wrote to Congress saying, hey, this applies to me. I am seeking Congress to get this disqualification removed as an ex-Confederate. Period.
Can we go back to
However,
the
there
Ukraine
is
war
a-
issue?
hold on,
I
there
think
is
it's more
a major
interesting.
distinction here, though. These people, they knew it's kind of like knowing that you're over the age of 35. Like, you knew that you put on a Confederate uniform. You knew that you fought. You knew that you were an expatriate. This is very different than someone like Donald Trump, who, thought he was giving a speech at the Capitol, and people argue that's insurrection, or Joe Biden, or Kamala Harris for supporting Black Lives Matter. Both of these arguably could be insurrection if you want to make that argument. However, that's still something debatable. Whereas whether or not you were actually engaged in putting on the uniform of the enemy, that's very black and white.
Lauren,
Nothing
that's
says
a
anything about
great-
uniforms.
Wait, Lauren, that's a great point. So I'm just going to ask you straight up: if there were any previous oath takers who engaged in violence on January 6th, do you agree that they're disqualified from office?
So once again, January 6th is very distinctly different than engaging in a battle in which you're putting on different uniforms signifying that you are of the opposition. The people engaged in January 6th very much feel as though they were protecting
So did the Civil War people.
Constitution.
So did the Civil War
themselves
people.
patriots. They would consider themselves United States allies.
So did the Civil War people.
The Civil
They
War
had
people
arguments.
would consider
They had
themselves
arguments that what they
Confederate.
did was. The argument by the secessionists were absolutely based on the original Constitution, and that this was part of their initial pact that they made, and they had all those the colorable legal arguments that you're referencing on the Trump side absolutely existed with the Civil War people.
Wait, hold on. No, wait. The Civil War people absolutely.
Putting on a separate uniform.
Wait, the Civil War people
fighting the
absolutely understood that they were part of a different country that was now waged in a war against the United States of America. The Civil War people are not at all comparable to J6ers.
Thank you.
They in the sense of insurrection, yes, and I'll show you how. Mr. Steven, actually, I'm gonna ask Lauren. Lauren, do you agree that the attack on Fort Sumter was an insurrection?
where they were actively trying to get the current United States government overthrown with the use of guns. I would consider that an insurrection. I wouldn't consider. I don't think
the attack
the
on
people
Fort
who
Sumter
were
was an
there,
insurrection,
the
right?
people who were there for January 6th were not attempting to go into
That's not what I just asked you. Was the attack on Fort Sumter? Was the attack on Fort Sumter an insurrection in your mind?
I suppose.
I hardly know.
I mean, you're not clear on it. It's the first battle of the Civil War, right? It's the start of the Civil War, isn't it? An insurrection?
Okay.
Yes. How many people died at Fort Sumter in the bombardment?
None, maybe. I don't know.
0.
Yeah, that's
None.
what I said.
Whatsoever. So, do you think that the people who enacted this clause of the 14th Amendment, do you think that an attack on Fort Sumter, some random fort that existed, where no one died, would be an insurrection, but an attack on the Capitol wouldn't be?
Okay, so once again, if you're going into a place to attempt to overthrow the government, you're attempting with weapons to kill people in the current state of government, whether or not you're successful or not,
I don't think it has to
is
be
a completely different thing. The people there for January 6th, I would say the majority of them didn't attack the Capitol. Many of them simply walked around, and none of them had
Were
weapons.
there those who attacked the Capitol?
Hold on. The facts of this are completely different. South Carolina had already declared their secession from the Union when their militia started to attack the United States of America. Why would you compare that to a bunch of overweight protesters that flew into D.C. to go and protest at the Capitol?
Okay, so I'll ask you, Stephen. Do you agree the attack on Fort Sumter was an insurrection?
It was either an insurrection or an act of war.
You're not sure?
Can I finish my sentence? It was either I don't know if you would call it an insurrection if they'd already seceded from the Union, because it's not even the same country at that point, right? So it would either be an insurrection or it would be an act of war. Yes.
So you just have no historical knowledge. You don't know at all what the text
Okay,
say,
let me know
what
in
people
5 minutes when you actually
Hang
get
on
to your
a second, hang on a
point.
second.
Holy shit.
So we know what they meant by insurrection, and we know what Lincoln was saying, contemporary politicians, what dictionaries say at the time. You were too bored to read the article. You don't know anything about this time period, and you don't know what they mean by insurrection, and you're just going off your gut feeling without having any knowledge whatsoever.
He
just did a whole ramble without even getting close to answering the question about it.
They all characterize the attack on Fort Sumter as an insurrection.
Pissing. This is the problem with what's happening right now in the media and what's happening on this panel, is that you know everything, you are piss quizzing everybody, but really you are the lawyer with the knowledge, and you're supposed to be able to make the argument to convince them of why the 14th Amendment Section 3 should be applied. You're supposed to be able to convince them, not attack their confidence.
Lauren, I tried to make the case that we shouldn't even agree to the Constitution, and the leftist infighting still ends up taking over. So,
Stephen, I mean,
you guys really got to turn the mirror inside.
So
This is ridiculous.
Stephen, and you tell me if you disagree. The attack on Fort Sumter was obviously an insurrection, as the people.
If you want to call it insurrection, I don't know if we consider it insurrection or act of war, whatever you want to call it. It's fine. That's not really the relevant situation. The relevant situation is comparing the violent actors at Fort Sumter to the violence in January 6th. They're completely different. If you want to call it an insurrection or whatever, that's fine, but it's totally different.
What's a comparison, Stephen? What's a comparison? For years you have said a comparison is useless if it's the same thing. We're comparing them in some respects and not in all respects.
We are comparing them in some... hold on.
The respect in which we are comparing them is whether or not they're insurrections or not.
That's true. And when we make the comparison, comparisons don't have to be the same thing. That's why they're comparisons. But there are also disanalogies that make comparisons not the same. For instance, a state seceding from the Union would dramatically change how we would view actors there. If it was the case, for instance, that West Virginia or some state around the Capitol seceded from the Union, and then those people went up to the Capitol, bro, at that point, I'm like, mobilize the army and nuke them. That's a totally different argument than protesters from all over the country during Jan 6. That's a totally different scenario.
So let me tell you why what you're saying is just not backed up by the historical definition of the word insurrection. There are a ton of insurrections that contemporaries at the time would recognize as insurrections that didn't have as their ultimate aim secession as their particular motive. The Whiskey Rebellion, right? That's what is that rebellion about, right? That is a rebellion about
whiskey.
The price, exactly. There you go.
Taxes, yeah.
It names itself, right? There are other insurrections that occurred at the same time. To say nothing of the John slavery guy. Someone help me. John Brown is his name. John. Someone will know what I'm talking
John
about.
Brown was the Harper's Ferry guy, wasn't he?
The person who, the person who got all the slaves and were trying to attack slave owners and all that stuff. That
John
was,
Brown.
there you go. So I got it right.
Here,
That's
actually,
an example
wait,
of insurrection.
Can I bridge this and maybe we can agree, okay? If every single person at the Jan 6 rally, if they were all part of the Proud Boys or whatever, then I'd probably agree. If it wasn't just like 5% or 1%, 95% of the people there were wanderers that were kind of on.
Cut it.
Okay, all right.
Not going to cut it. So
that's fine. But that's fine. But if you want to say that those people are the same, that the overweight type 2 diabetics that were dying of heart attacks in the Capitol are the same as the South Carolina militia bombarding a U.S. fucking base, then whatever, dude. If you want to say that's the same, then knock yourself out. Okay.
This is bad faith. You're trying to ascribe to me an equality in all things between the Jan 6ers and the people at Fort Sumter.
Yeah, and you're trying to tell Lauren. You're trying to tell Lauren when Lauren asked you, do you think that Confederate soldiers that were fighting in the war are those people how are they being disqualified by Section 3? And you're going, well, what about the very first attack of the Civil War? Like that wasn't even her question. But that's where you went. You went to the hardest to determine case to make an argument about the general obvious case of the people that were wearing Confederate uniforms fighting in the Civil War.
No. The point is, Stephen, it's not a hard case. The attack on Fort Sumter is so obviously an insurrection and recognized as such by everyone at the time that to deny that Fort Sumter is, the reason I picked it is to deny that Fort Sumter is an insurrection makes you, self-evidently disqualifies your opinion on insurrections.
That proves my point. Everybody at the time agreed that was an insurrection. You know what everybody at this current time doesn't agree? That January 6th was an insurrection.
Okay, but obviously...
You're not going to get everybody in the United States to agree on that.
The basis under which to say that, like, we agree or don't agree on today's insurrections or non-insurrections, the case may be, is not evidence of what the text meant back in the day. When we evaluate text, right, I thought that what we do is we look at the original public meaning of the text at the time that it's enacted. Isn't that your position? And so now you're citing the fact that there's, public controversy today about categorizing this particular thing as an insurrection. That is not helpful in our analysis of what the Constitution actually says.
You are citing the public opinion of the current time, of the time back then, of everybody agreeing that it was an insurrection, but now I can't use the public opinion of the current situation.
Do you think you should be able to? You think you should be able to
use the public
Well, I don't think Pisco was
level.
making the argument. I don't think Pisco was making the argument that Confederates were disqualified by their participation in the siege on Fort Sumter simply because pretty much everybody agreed it was an insurrection.
Correct,
right?
yeah.
Right, but not
it's because
but
everyone agreed with the word.
January 6ers on the same issue. However, January 6ers, not everybody agrees, was engaged in insurrection. In fact, majority of conservatives would say they weren't engaged in insurrection because they had no means, they didn't attempt to overthrow the United States government. They didn't go in there with weapons, and the majority of them were just walking around.
I agree with Lauren. Lauren, can we argue about that? Let's argue about that.
About what?
Was January 6th an insurrection? Isn't that relevant to whether or not Donald Trump should be president?
It's 100% relevant.
So who thinks January 6th was? Who said it
was an insurrection? Easy.
Who thinks it was an insurrection?
January 6th was obviously an insurrection. Yes.
It was not.
And why are you fighting me on?
Hold on.
Because I don't mind.
Oh my God.
Because I agree. Wait, I agree. Hold on. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry. I agree that Donald Trump shouldn't be allowed to run for president. I think the way Section 3 reads, Donald Trump shouldn't be allowed to run for president. I agree with that. I just think the process by which we determine that is really fucking important. I don't know why you're shaking your head at me. I already gave you 2 great examples earlier.
Why did you fucking talk to me about Fort Sumter? Why are you giving me shit about that?
What do you mean? Why am I giving you shit? I just don't think that comparison to January 6th is a good comparison. Because Fort Sumter...
You agree they're both insurrections. That's how I was comparing them.
Yes, but January... No.
Well, how about wait. Agree on insurrection aren't the ones debating right now.
South Carolina was obviously an insurrection because they seceded from the United States in January.
So you agree they're both insurrections. That was my point.
No, but the point is that we were arguing earlier. I believe we were arguing earlier. I even brought this up 50 minutes ago, and then I think Lauren or just somebody brought it up again. How did we know that the people were disqualified from the Confederacy under Section 3? And then the answer ultimately was, well, Duh, they were fucking Confederate soldiers. And it's like, okay, that's a fair point. But when we look at J6ers, okay, if you go down to the Confederacy and you say, are you fighting against the United States of America? Do you want to secede? All of them are like, abso-fucking-lutely. If you go up to the Jan 6ers and you guys, were you guys fighting to break free of the United States or to throw over the government? Half of those people would probably say, I have no fucking idea that even happened. Some 1 to 5% of them were literally directly involved in planning it, and probably 20 to 30% of them were like, you know what, if that's what we're there to do, fuck it, I'm on board with it. Yes.
Let's make it super easy. And I'm sorry, I've been very combative. I'll take the temperature right down, and I'm real sorry. I'm very passionate about this stuff. I let my emotions boil over sometimes. What I'm going to ask, I think this is an easy question or easy example to use for someone in January 6th who says, yeah, we were trying to put Trump in office, and yeah, we did try to do that.
Disqualifying from every office.
Do you think that person needs to have a criminal conviction for him to be disqualified? If they took part in violence, that they didn't encourage it. It wasn't like some equivocal statement. They took part in violence.
That.
Well, no, but they didn't take an oath.
They either need a criminal conviction,
assuming that they took an oath.
Oh, okay.
I think they need either a criminal conviction or it needs to be apparently obvious that there's no dispute in fact on the matter. So the issue for me is whether or not it's disputable in fact. If you're putting on the uniform of a foreign country and you're not an American spy, then yeah, you're putting on the uniform of an enemy combatant. It's clear as day there's not anything to be adjudicated with in a trial. However, if a person doesn't believe that they've ever engaged in anything insurrection or rebellious and they want to run for office, I would think that they would need a criminal charge against them to be excluded. Yeah, I think the level should be beyond a reasonable doubt.
Why do you think that? You just think that because that's your field.
No, wait. Because what if a Jan 6er went there because they legitimately thought they were trying to protect an electoral process?
Being mistaken about the law has never been an excuse to insurrection or rebellion.
No one's saying a mistake in the law. It's a mistake in fact.
Yeah, no. If you think that what has happened, right? Yeah, mistake in fact, right? Like if you think that.
Hold on, wait. A mistake in fact, unless we're talking about a strict liability offense, a mistake in fact can absolutely change determination of.
If your intent, right?
You're actually a lawyer, right?
I'm a lawyer. Yeah. You didn't let me finish what I was saying. You don't know what I was going to say.
Cook. Keep cooking.
You've been wrong about a lot today. You didn't even read the indictments, and we're having a debate about the indictments.
Okay.
Wait, first of all, we're not having a debate about the indictments. We're having a debate about Section 3 of Amendment 14, to be clear right now. Okay, but
it can include everything, but to be fair for Lauren, there is somebody who's been held to the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment and been removed from office in New Mexico, but she is correct in that judge was convicted for trespassing. So they did go through court already. Yes, but that person went through a conviction. So is she wrong for saying why shouldn't the president?
She is wrong, but it's a great point to bring up. And Chaeiry, I'm really impressed with these panels, and you always bring up relevant stuff, and I appreciate it. What do you want to say?
Boo! Suck up! Boo! Go back to fighting with Destiny.
In New Mexico, under New Mexican Constitution is different than the requirements to be president, which are completely different with the federal
Constitution. They applied the 14th Amendment. No, Chaeiry's correct. They applied Section 3 of the 14th Amendment in that specific case.
You're talking about Coy Griffin, right, from New Mexico, the commissioner?
I believe, yeah. I think that's right. So what Chaeiry said is, but he did have a conviction for trespassing, so doesn't that go to your point, Lauren? And the answer is, of course not, because a conviction for trespassing isn't the standard. It's engaging in insurrection or rebellion. It'd be fucked up if someone who was merely trespassing and wasn't engaging in insurrection or rebellion was disqualified, right?
Well, where were they trespassing?
He trespassed in the Capitol building.
Okay, so
I'm not
they
here
were
to say
a
that
county commissioner, not a judge. That was my
wait. To be clear, isn't that kind of important? Because if they were engaged in trespassing like their neighbor's house to steal some barbecued Lays, that's a lot different than engaged in trespassing in like a courthouse or something where you could argue that the Constitution is.
Pisco's point is that if trespassing alone, as your point is with the Lays, is completely different than trespassing in the Capitol. So therefore, if trespassing on the Capitol is enough to remove her, then the Capitol itself will be considered an.
I don't think they're connected. The criminal conviction for trespassing in the Capitol is not connected to the determination made that you engage in insurrection or rebellion. They're separate. And you're trying to impose a connection there because it feels right that there should be this criminal process that I'm used to.
Then what? Yes, the criminal conviction of trespassing on the Capitol was absolutely used to prove that she was involved in insurrection or rebellion.
As a factual matter, I will tell you that, like, yeah, probably as the fact that they're identified, the fact that they were convicted, the fact all that probably like causally led to them noticing this person and having the gumption to disqualify them. But as a legal matter, there's no connection.
What court?
I'm not.
Sorry. What process was used to prevent her from being on the ballot? So
he was already on the ballot. He was taken out of office by the judge's decision.
So
kicked out
because a lawsuit was brought up, and then for his involvement in the Capitol riots, and it was the trespassing conviction that was the evidence.
He was impeached then. He was removed from office.
No,
I don't think he was. I don't know. I don't think that was the mechanism. I think the judge just ordered.
Wait. Pisco shook his head. How was he removed from office? What was the process? You just shook your head and laughed when she brought up impeachment.
Hang on. I don't know what you're... Stephen, are you pissed at me?
No, hold on, wait. You've been incredibly sorry this whole conversation. Hold on, wait. Because
what
I'm sorry, my understanding...
Wait,
hold on, let me explain my thought process. My understanding is just being convicted of a... Hold on, yes, almost all of them. Wait, my question is, just because you're convicted of a crime, does that automatically remove you from office? I thought there'd have to be an impeachment process. And somebody mentioned... Okay, so of course not. So explain to me, because I don't know. I didn't do law school.
Okay, because you're not paying... You're half paying attention. You're
I'm fully paying attention to everything you're saying. You're diverting again. You just did another diversion. If I wasn't paying attention, how did I notice you laughing? How did I notice you laughing when she gave that answer? I just want to hear the answer.
The thing is, because Josiah has said it now 2 or 3 times that the process was the third section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and there was a court order that removed him from office. That's the process, and it's been stated multiple times.
What is the process?
He just said a judge removed him. So there was.
So a judge said leave. I just want to know what the process is. That's my question. Why don't you do this? Isn't process like one of the most important fucking things you study in law school? Like civil procedure, criminal procedure. Like, isn't like the process really important?
Do you think that? Do you think I'm putting my hands to my head because like I don't think process is important, or because I just explained the process to you and you asked again what the process was?
So you said a judge removed him. So if you're guilty of a crime, a judge can say you have to leave office. Is that the process? That might be the process. I'm just asking.
Oh my God. There was a determination as to the applicability of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. There was evidence put on. A hearing was had. People talked about the relevant provision. By the way, this failed in several cases with Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, where they had processes and they failed, and there were judicial determinations on the record that said, we don't think Marjorie Taylor Greene engaged in insurrection.
So I'm going to throw this here. I'm going to send you the link. But yeah, defendant shall be it's the conclusion at the end of the judge's ruling, Stephen. Defendant shall be removed from his position as Otero County Commissioner effective immediately. Defendant is permanently enjoined and prohibited from performing any official acts in his purported capacity as an Otero County Commissioner on behalf of the board. Yada yada. Permanently enjoined. Yeah, basically get the fuck out. You're done.
Yeah, get the fuck out.
But Lauren is correct that this whole thing does have to do with labeling this as an insurrection and goes towards it being viewed as an insurrection, because part of what was wrong with Griffin was that he would not solidify or certify the state's primary election results, and the judge themselves called it an insurrection for the first time, and that's why a lot of people
the determination, no one denies or disputes that the determination of insurrection or rebellion is absolutely necessary, or that you give aid or comfort to someone who engages in insurrection or rebellion or the enemies thereof. That has been crystal clear. The question is who decides, and that's what Destin has been soying out about for the past hour, is who decides. And it's like this world-shattering mind event for him that a court of law might decide in a proceeding with evidence and a
court
judge,
of law.
and they write an
so
opinion.
your local city courthouse with your judge, sheriff badge 0001 shows up, and that court of law just determines. Sorry, but okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but if this does hypothetically, this is my lack of legal training gets the better of me. If it does make its way before the Supreme Court, can't the Supreme Court mandate a universal you got to create a commission to determine
100%.
These questions?
Yeah.
Right.
So if the Supreme Court could disagree with these guys, you guys are just accepting our framework in some ways that we're talking about, and it's not at all. There's no settled law here. that it is what we say, and the Supreme Court could come out and say, and there have been a court, I believe there's a court in Arizona that said, no, it's not self-executing. This amendment needs to be enforced with congressional legislation. We disagree with that, but
it was a case brought against the current district attorney Fincham. Yeah.
Okay, so can I ask a question then on this? So let's say that you have, let's say that there is a county commissioner in the state of New York. And let's say that video footage comes out and he gets convicted of throwing a Molotov cocktail or being in a group of people that threw a Molotov cocktail in Seattle at a police building. Okay, let's say that he gets convicted there. He serves 2 weeks in prison. He bails out, gets out, whatever, other bullshit. He goes back to New York. And then a judge in New York says, I'm sorry, but I think that this is essentially an insurrection. You tried to overthrow the government in Seattle. And they remove him from using Section 3. They remove him from office. Do you think that would be an acceptable chain of events?
Factually, maybe it would be, it depends on the facts. As you're laying them out, someone, like, and just repeating back your facts in terms of like the actual substance of what you're talking about. If someone were to like to throw a Molotov cocktail in Seattle with the purpose of overthrowing the government of Seattle,
or let's say he was just a protester that was in Chaz. He didn't throw it. He was just somebody that was part of the Chaz.
That's a harder case of whether or not he engaged in insurrection or rebellion.
Wait, Chaz was literally an independent autonomous zone.
No. He's describing an individual who did not actually throw anything, or just like happens to be standing there, right?
Well, what was the county commissioner involved in? Did he actually break a window, or was he just there trespassing?
Yeah. So I'm just telling you, like, if this guy is leading Chaz, I don't have a problem with that. 100%. I would say that fulfills the insurrection, so long as he was a previous oath taker and he fulfills all those other requirements. Then yeah, that chain substantively makes sense, and procedurally also makes sense. And it's appealable, so it's not just this county commissioner. So he can go to the appellate division, or maybe he goes directly to to the court of appeals. I don't know the process necessarily in court of appeals, the highest appellate court division in New York State. And from there would be a federal question pertaining to the 14th Amendment that the Supreme Court could answer. So
I guess,
all of that
and the hard
totally
thing would be, so this is the question I think ultimately that Lauren had, and I guess it's one now that I have. The question would be, at no point, my understanding is that this county commissioner, he was never convicted of sedition or insurrection or anything like that. He was just convicted of trespassing. So how do you make the determination? He appeals that up to a court. How do the judges make a determination of whether or not this falls under Section 3?
So the burden is probably going to be on the person. I don't know what the specific burdens in any particular jurisdiction might be. That's why I'm hesitating before I tell you. But like, suppose that it's like the normal course of events, and someone is suing to, remove you from office or something like that, where whatever reason.
It shouldn't be on a particular jurisdiction, because as you said, that this is based off the 14th Amendment, so you should be applying federal standards.
It would be federal standards applied, but I won't say as you know. State courts are presumed. I believe the case.
You're not going to say as I know because you don't think I know. Go ahead.
No, because that was a dick thing to do, and I'm sorry about that. There's a case called Taflin v. Levitt, or some other case, or Testa. So one of these cases in federal courts where state courts are presumptively assumed to be able to enforce federal law, and they do. There's, I believe there's state enforcement of federal RICO, or there might not be. I don't know. There's some areas where there's exclusive federal jurisdiction over stuff, but state courts are presumed to follow the Constitution and follow federal law, and so there'd be no problem with a state court interpreting and applying the 14th Amendment.
But what's the standard? What's the burden of proof that the state court has to apply in order to uphold federal law in determining whether or not somebody is insurrectionist or rebellious and therefore should be precluded from a federal ballot?
Yeah, the substantive standard is the 14th Amendment, Section 3, which says if you engage in insurrection or rebellion, or you give aid or comfort. That's the substantive standard. You're asking about what the burden of proof is, and that's going to depend on the state courts at the time.
It should be a federal standard, because as you said, it's federal law.
But hang on. Just because you're interpreting federal law, this is like another eerie question of state substantive versus procedural law. State courts have the right to impose their own procedural rules, and so I don't know if the burden of proof is a substantive rule or a procedural rule, or what the deal is, or whether the Supreme Court is going to.
That is not procedural.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure that's. I'm not sure, and so I'm assuming for purposes of a federal law that eventually the Supreme Court will enunciate some standard. But that's
Jury
like
wouldn't
not the
apply
interesting
to
question. That's not an interesting question. The interesting question is like, let's apply this to Trump. And we're an hour and 20 minutes in, and we haven't applied it to Trump. And those are the difficult questions I think that you guys can impose on us, is how can you prove that Trump engaged in insurrection?
That's so easy for Trump, though. I feel like that's
don't even agree that this was an insurrection.
Yeah,
Right.
but
I guess that's
they're insane. They're wild.
That
okay?
might be interesting.
I feel like the Trump one isn't interesting because I think if you're not being an insanely partisan person, it's obvious that Trump did. But again, I think the worry is that, like, say Dylan Burns was there filming during the fucking riots or whatever, and he steps into the Capitol and he gets a conviction for trespassing. I feel like, I don't know, maybe I just have a totally different understanding of this. Like, we're waving away like, oh, well, it's boring to figure out what burden of proof would be. I feel like that's like one of the most important questions here. Like, if I ever get convicted for trespassing on federal property and I've ever held an office before, am I Section 3'd out of any particular office I could hold in the future of my entire life now? That seems insane to me.
But hang on, the question, there's two questions there embedded, and I just want to help you identify them. One is, what level of certainty do we have that you fulfilled a given standard? And number two is, what is that standard? Does that make sense? So am I 50% certain that you fulfilled this standard? Am I 80% certain that you fulfilled that standard? Am I beyond a reasonable doubt that you fulfilled this standard?
Sure.
What are you specifically worried about? The standard or the degree of certainty that we have that the person actually fulfills the standard?
I feel like both are
there are
very
questions
important.
for both.
I feel like both are very important.
Because there are a lot of people who say, how can, there are First Amendment concerns. How can you how can you disqualify based on speech? How can you disqualify based on non-violent conduct if that's what Trump did, right? Trump, you agree, he didn't engage in any violence.
Sure.
So there are some.
Or
tough
like somebody
questions
could
about
literally
the
say
standard.
that, like, if you commit any sort of felony on federal grounds or any sort of trespassing, that counts as breaking an oath.
Right.
But then there would be
Is
questions about,
insurrection
like,
included
what
the
if you were
BLM stuff?
a civil rights or a civil rights activist and you were doing a sit-in at a congressional building? Are you now barred from holding any future political office because that was an insurrectionist act? Or if you were one of the feminists that
Are
went,
you
like,
implying that Biden could be held to the same standard for supporting the BLM, right?
or especially Kamala Harris for the aiding and abetting enemies because she was helping people post bail who were attacking the United States, right?
Well, let's deal with them. Let's deal with them. So, one that I was often brought up by people is during BLM there was an attack on the White House. You guys aware of this? There was an attack
In May.
by
Late
people. This was during the bunker
Really?
situation.
The drone?
No. This was.
These were people
were
at the
literally
gates. They had to
attacking
take
Secret Service
Trump.
people.
They had to take Trump to a bunker.
Yeah. It's like fireworks, right?
I didn't hear about this. Did CNN
Yeah,
suppress
this
this?
is like. No,
it was
That's-
reported.
This is,
That is odd,
Twitter,
though. That
Twitter suppressed this.
not
That's why you
supposed
didn't hear about it.
probably. This was before Elon.
The new edition of the
tweeted
Twitter
out.
files.
Yeah.
Okay, so in May 2020, right? If someone had gone to try to attack and assassinate Trump, which a lot of people accuse the protesters that they were trying to do something with Trump, right? Why were they trying to get to the White House? But let's say that we could read into their minds, and we knew that they wanted to go in, they wanted to kill Trump, right? And we knew that this was like a previous oath taker. Everyone, I think, on this panel should agree that that person who attempted to kill Donald Trump should be disqualified under Section 3. If in part of this general revolt against the White House, there was a person who wanted to kill the president, shouldn't that person be disqualified under Section 3?
If we could read their minds and in fact determine for a fact they were attempting to assassinate the president, yes. However, just based off what actually occurred, which was people being unruly outside of the White House with firecrackers and being obnoxious, and I would say like slightly worse than the January 6ers, but pretty much online with them.
Let's talk about that. It's more interesting.
There's a lot of people who are hurt.
I wouldn't say that would be enough to qualify for insurrection.
Raises the mic.
After Lauren, PF, what are you saying? Because I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can we talk about some of this? I mean, I know this has been incredibly exciting to watch the Orc Boys fight each other constantly on the left. But this whole independent state legislator theory thing, this is the best argument I've heard from the right. And I want to ask the lawyers what they think of it. That Trump was operating under the advice from his counsel that he had a valid legal contesting of the election, and didn't in Moore versus Harper, the Supreme Court case that recently got struck down, weren't there, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 Supreme Court justices who said independent state legislator was a thing? So could it?
Well, because 3 is fewer than 6, it doesn't matter. So,
well, but it certainly is evidence that it's not some crackpot legal theory.
Unless the 3 in question are crackpots.
Well, that's fine. In which
all,
case, why not subvert the Constitution and
the
the
three didn't rule on the
Supreme Court?
merits. I believe that you had 3 people who who wanted to.
Can you
didn't want to
explain
take the case.
Can you explain for myself and people watching the steel man of independent state legislator theory?
Okay, so different parts of the Constitution, the elections clause of Article 1 of the Constitution says that state legislatures will be the ones who determine, the Senate, and in the case of the presidential electors clause, that's the one that determines who the electors are. That state legislatures will be in charge of where the presidential electors, who they are, right? And so what the independent state legislature theory says is when they say state legislature, they mean state legislature exclusive of governor's veto, exclusive of any sort of referendum or ballot initiative,
or the Constitution, even,
or the courts,
or the state constitution. Even if the state constitution provides a provision which says that those decisions are subject to review, you can override the state constitution.
They're not bound. They're only bound by federal law and federal constitution. They're not bound by state constitutional law. They're not bound by state judges, state determinations, all of that. That's sort of the theory. And the 6-3 split, I think, is a little bit deceiving in terms of the Supreme Court justice. But it's also, he's not being indicted, or he wouldn't be, subject to Section 3 because he asked a couple state legislators to change the presidential electors' votes. There's a lot more stuff going on here.
Well, wasn't the indictment that he had false electors lined up?
Yeah, that's different. But
that's the independent state legislator idea.
No. Notice the sleight of hand here, right? The independent state legislator theory says state legislators are in charge of who the presidential electors are. In the case of Trump and the fake elector scheme, the state legislators, even if you buy the independent state legislator theory, they had spoken and they had chose their electors. And
True,
what
they
Donald
certified.
Trump conspired to do, right? What Donald Trump
could hypothetically, and I genuinely don't know. Like I said, I'm just trying to make the argument that has been used against me to smarter people. Could it not be the case that, for example, like in Georgia, this is not the case, but if the state legislator decided, hey, we have reason to believe there was fraud, that they could, in fact, do a recount on their own accord and not have it subject to the courts?
I don't know.
They
if
did do recounts and audits,
a law.
by the way.
I mean, well, they did do a recount.
That's
I don't know if they could pass a law that said we now award our electors in favor of Donald Trump, or
because I think because
that's not what happened.
Okay, but when I
do that.
Because when I read the indictments, I was like, oh damn! I was under the impression January 6th, was a bunch of bullshit like the BLM stuff in terms of it was bad, but it wasn't a literal attempt to install a puppet government. And then I read the indictments and I was like, oh shit, he had false electors lined up. But if the false electors were electors that were chosen by the independent state legislators, or that was what his lawyers were telling him, then doesn't Trump have legal defense to say?
No.
Hold on, but no. Regardless of whether or not independent state legislator is a valid theory, which I have no possible bearing on, which I could say.
I'm saying regardless.
Yeah. So isn't Trump operating under the guidance of his legal counsel a valid defense for him not committing treason or whatever it is?
Because the state legislators, even if they are independent or non-independent, the state legislators had assigned the presidential electors, and those presidential electors were picked by the state legislators pursuant to state law. In reality, it was an election, but that they didn't choose to follow Trump, and so Trump cannot claim the independence of the state legislators to block him from trying to subvert.
Why?
He's subverting the state legislators.
It would be the independence of independent state legislature doctrine that he would be peddling, because he's not even deferring to state legislatures.
So what is your understanding of what Trump's lawyers were telling him that he could do? Some were disputing it, but there were some lawyers who were pushing forward state legislator theory, and I'm asking you. That's what I want to know.
Yeah. So it doesn't.
What's the steel man of the legal perspective that
there is no steel man as relates to independent state legislator theory? That steel man only goes so far as him asking state legislators to please, redo it for him. Like he could have, but they rejected him, right?
Well, I don't know. Okay, you could be right. I don't know.
They did. They did. So governors rejected him.
Well, you guys also believe in Russiagate, and Josiah has lied to me about Russiagate. So it's hard to when you say they did. I'm like, okay, I believe you, but I've made that mistake before.
I think the issue is that if you read the Trump, the issue is when you read the Trump indictments, for instance, relating to the collaborating with some people or conspiring to say that the election was fake. Part of the evidence brought up for that is Trump did not have all of these people behind him that were saying you're in the right. right. You're in the right. You're in the right. On the contrary, I believe it was the case that some of his most ardent defenders, like Barr even, were saying, you are wrong. You are full of shit. This is not true. Yes. So that I think that was part of the issue, is that I don't believe that Trump had this legitimate backing, or ever believed that he had a legitimate backing for any of these things. He was just doing whatever he could to hold on to power.
Well, that's fair. And if it is the case that there really were no lawyers advising him about any possible legal
they were just
contestation.
You have John Eastman.
You just said.
Well, no,
Destiny just said there weren't.
Steve, basically 99.9% of Trump's advisors, from his own attorney general, his White House counsel, the people, you could put on two hands the number, the people who are advocating Trump's position, saying yes, you do have a basis to overturn the election, and they're like outnumbered 100-1 by the people in Trump's orbit saying you absolutely don't.
Okay, does the number of people giving you advice
it should
disregard the defense of operating under general counsel?
Wait, no, there's no.
I don't think so.
Sorry. So if a lawyer so I just want to get this clear. If a lawyer tells me it's okay to shoot and murder someone in broad daylight, that's not a defense to any fucking crime.
Right, but if a lawyer tells you, hey, this is how you legally contest something that is not, settled on how you legally contest it, that seems much more like a valid defense.
Okay, so they're telling him literally. You have certain lawyers of his, Sidney Powell and others, and Eastman, telling him to invoke the Insurrection Act and seize voting machines.
And that Mike Pence can unilaterally decide which votes. And by the way, when Eastman, the guy saying, yeah, Mike Pence can just toss out the votes he doesn't like, when Eastman is asked by Trump's own White House counsel, okay, so does that mean in 2000 when Al Gore, Democratic Vice President Al Gore, could he have done that to Bush? Eastman's like, well, no, of course not.
Could he have
meaning it only applies to apparently Donald Trump uniquely. It's bullshit.
Sure,
It's
I'm asking because I have been told by people who really like Trump, even more than Lauren, that he was operating under the guidance of his legal counsel, and that is his defense. And it's interesting because I did go back and watch a video of his on Twitter the day after the January 6th riots, and he said, we condemned the violence, it was disgusting, we did everything we could to legally contend the election. So, he could cite that in the court case and say, hey, I was operating under the belief that I was trying to pursue legal avenues that my trusted lawyers, maybe 99% of them, which I find to be an exaggeration probably, were telling me no, but the ones that I trusted were telling me that this is valid. That at minimum, I understand how that could be a valid legal defense. I'm not saying it is. I don't know jack shit about it. I don't even know who John Eastman is. I thought that was Clint Eastwood, but John Eastman is what, his lawyer?
Lauren, you're muted.
Lauren,
if you're talking,
muted.
Lauren, you're muted.
You've been muted this whole time.
The entire
show. It would be a valid legal defense if there was a mens rea which required there to be a thought of a certain level of degree of mens rea means how culpable are you in your brain, how much are you meaning to do something. However, most of these crimes don't require a mens rea. You're either guilty of doing it or not doing it.
What are you talking about? Most of these crimes don't require mens rea.
Like, for instance, trespassing. You could not mean to trespass, but if you walk onto a property in which is not yours, in which you don't have the right to be there, you're guilty of trespass even if you didn't have the mens rea. So if your lawyer tells you it's okay to do a particular crime in which there's not a mens rea element, and you engage in that crime, it's not a defense to say, I thought it was legal because my attorney told me so. And this is exactly what happened in the Martin Shkreli case, unfortunately, which is why his attorney went to prison as well.
Ben Braffman went to prison?
He had several attorneys.
Okay.
Wait, so does the mens rea apply here or not?
Mens rea absolutely applies to all these crimes. What she's talking about are a few strict liability crimes. I don't even know if I'm probably fairly confident that criminal trespass requires mens rea. Mens rea is the default assumption for every single crime, even when in the particular statute.
One of the main examples in law school that doesn't require.
Yeah, but again, obviously it's very
civil trespass, right? Civil trespass in the tort field.
Yeah, I was gonna say, isn't most tort and civil procedure? Isn't most of that strict liability? Doesn't require mens rea? But I think for criminal stuff, I think
that's not a crime. We're talking about crimes, right?
Yeah.
So in crimes, the default assumption for strict liability, it's nuclear shit or putting off fireworks or some stuff the inherently dangerous shit that where we just want to impose, or what's another one? Statutory rape, other ones where we don't allow mens rea. I didn't know that she was 16 or 15 or whatever. That's not a defense. but most of these crimes require mens rea.
Or my lawyer
It
told
is-
me that in this state, 15
Let
was
me-
the legal age.
Let me ask.
Even though
Well,
Lauren
but I think it
and-
depends. I think
Lauren
there are certain
and-
It
crimes.
depends.
There are certain crimes
Or
that a
Stephen
lawyer
depends.
can't convince you out of, right? Again, like Pisco said, if a lawyer tells you, yeah, you can definitely murder somebody and you'll be okay. I don't think you can just offshore all that responsibility onto the lawyer. There's probably going to be a general expectation of like laws. Like if a lawyer tells you
Reasonable
if
person,
you don't have to file a 1099 this year, you'll be fine, and the IRS finds you, that's probably going to be a different thing than telling you to like commit a felony. I would imagine.
And Trump undermines the mens rea argument in the indictments. I mean, we have, depending on what case you're talking about, like classified documents, we have recording of him saying, I could have declassified these, but I didn't. And then in the one with January 6th, there are multiple times, and like he tells Mike Pence, you're too honest, when Mike Pence says that he, won't cooperate to overturn the results of the election. So there is evidence proposed in the indictments that Trump knew he lost the election.
Hang on, if you don't
let
buy
me
this,
let me ask Lauren and PF, because I understand you guys are a little bit dogpiley, and if I do
me?
give to you guys, no, not you.
I'm getting dogpiled. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming to my defense.
If I were to grant to you guys advice of counsel, the question is now today, if he knows better, but he still believes that Pence should have been able to do something different, that Pence should have been able to like answer the call or whatever, would you not then completely throw out advice of counsel?
So
He knows better.
I don't know what is going through his head. I watched his interview on Tucker Carlson, and at least in his mind, and perhaps he's just truly
That is the
insane
reason
and
for the
hallucinatory. Yeah. And he said he at least in the interview is under the impression that if there was reason to believe that there was fraud at the state level, and I think this is where independent state legislator theory comes on, where it's like, hey, if we think there's fraud in Michigan or whatever, then the Michigan state legislator is the sole authority of whether or not there needs to be a recount or something like that. And Trump thinks, as of 5 days ago or whatever he got interviewed by Tucker, that Pence had the authority to say, hold on, we suspect there may be fraud due to the mail-in ballots. We're going to send it back to the state legislators for a recount.
So if he thinks that 5 days ago, can he still apply advice of counsel? And that's why.
The question is, why does he think that? Did he just make that up, or are there lawyers who believe that to this point?
Well,
I don't know.
I think the question would be, this would be my guess, and something would go to proving this, is if Trump goes up to one lawyer and he asks him a question, hey, can I do this thing? And that lawyer says yes, then it seems like Trump is probably acting out of good faith. But if Trump goes to one lawyer, then another, then another, then another, and 10, 15, 20 tell him no, and then he finds one that tells him yes, and then he stops, my guess is going to be is that that's going to play into his state of mind of whether he was...
Is that what happened?
Absolutely, that's what happened.
How many did he ask? How many lawyers did he ask?
His Justice Department. He's like
That's not his counsel. Will Barr is not his lawyer.
Okay, you're asking if his personal lawyers, not his White House counsel or any kind of investigatory body.
I think William Barr. William Barr was the
only. No,
Wouldn't the Attorney
was
General be
seeking-
like the chief guy that would know if you could do this or not? Or am I wrong? Or like, would...
I don't know that. What like certainly there's a difference between William Barr and like
No.
who was the
What
woman
Destiny's
John
saying is
Eastman
he was-
and the other woman.
He was seeking a lot of different opinions on the fraud
He
or
was
non-fraud
shopping.
of the election, and he was shopping for opinions.
and look,
ways
if
to
you're
do it,
right,
and-
then that's fair. I'm just asking questions.
How do you prove
okay,
that
I'm a
you're right,
centrist.
Pisco?
I don't have any principles. I'm just asking questions.
Yeah. So you prove you're right by reading the second impeachment and the House. The
January
Select Committee
6th.
on
Yeah.
January 6th. Those are fountains of information. Public reporting on it suggested as well. And really just take this approach to its logical conclusion. Suppose you had John Eastman saying something like this to Donald Trump, and he says, it's actually legal in the case of fraud. You actually can suspend parts of the Constitution, and you can order the Department of Defense to put, Marines into Congress and force you yourself to be declared the president. And that's legal, actually. Would you ever be like, well, his lawyer said?
I somehow doubt that that's how his lawyer would say it.
No, I'm sorry. Answer the fucking question. Sorry.
Well,
should be.
hold on. I think
Been
you're
very
putting him in a
offensive
really
this whole
tough spot
conversation.
because
Can you
as a
answer the
lawyer,
question?
you know,
How do you force him to answer the question? You answer him a question that you can't even prove. Like, oh
Wait,
yes,
wait,
absolutely. Trump
Wait, I
kept
have a
looking for
question
lawyers
for
until he found one that
Pisco.
said
No,
what he
he
wanted.
absolutely
How do you
he
prove
absolutely
that?
sorry. He absolutely did.
Pisco.
No, he
Okay, he is charged with 40 indictments of containing the illegal of containing classified documents, and he's also charged with trying to overthrow the election? What is the mens rea culpability for these charges? Can he say,
They're different.
I didn't know that it was illegal to have this conversation and therefore escape liability, or just the fact that he had
Have you read the statutes?
classified
All right, I'll
documents
answer your
makes
question.
him-
I'll answer your question for all of them. So with respect to the National Defense Information, that's part of the Espionage Act, and the subsections in which he's charged specifically state that you have to have a willful mindset. So the mens rea in that case is willful. The mens rea in obstruction cases is always going to be intentional. You have to intend to corruptly influence proceedings. So there's an additional kind of pseudo mens rea element, which is the corruption part of it. And for all the crimes related to the election stuff, there are mens rea components to them as well. The one about the deprivation of rights, the one about, it's not a crime to accidentally deprive people of rights, right? People do that all the time. People argue that Joe Biden, accidentally, I could say, or maybe intentionally, deprives people of rights if he imposes some legislation. And guess what?
Wait, what rights are
Sometimes
they accusing Trump of depriving?
your right to vote?
In what did he do specifically to do that?
By trying to send fake electors.
So if you have the right to vote, if states give you the right to vote for presidential electors, and people vote for their presidential electors, and that's given to you by the Constitution, Article 1 and others, Article 2 as well. If that's the case, and you subvert the electors that are picked by those independent state legislators, and you send fake ones, aren't you trying to undermine your right?
Okay, hypothetically, if there was fraud, and obviously the Trump supporters claim there was evidence of fraud. I have no possible way to look at it, but let's say hypothetically there was fraud. Is there not valid reason to then say, whoa, we want to look at this? That's not depriving people of rights.
For these indictments, okay, this is really, really, really important, and it's spelled out explicitly in the first paragraphs of the indictments. Donald Trump has every right to believe that the election was fraudulent. He can think it was fake. He can think that people stole it. He can think the mission was rigged. That is absolutely A-okay, and it is well within his right to think that. The issue, and the reason why they're going with the conspiracy charge and they're not doing the insurrection, the reason why they're focusing on this specifically is because the problem is that he took actions. He had every legal right to seek remedy through Congress, to seek remedy through federal courts, to seek remedy through state court, whatever he wanted to do, whoever was charged.
To lie.
Yes, he could do that. The issue is that when he started to take steps to deprive people of their right to vote, meaning he started to take extrajudicial steps to deny the electors, to tell Pence to deny the vote, to do these extra things, he was operating on a non-factual basis because everybody around him was saying, hey, I don't think you can do this. Hey, I don't think you're right. He took, instead of just believing that the election was rigged, he took steps to act like it was rigged, and that's what they're going after him for. He did not have the proof to deprive people of their rights to do this. It would be the difference between me saying, I think that guy yesterday that I saw yesterday, I think he was going to kill me. I really do think he was, versus me going out and preemptively killing somebody because I think they're going to kill me. I have a right to believe that my life is in danger at any point. I'm never going to get in trouble for that. But if I go and I kill somebody thinking that my life is in danger, well, now I need to prove that that was actually the case. And Donald Trump took extrajudicial steps to deprive people of the right to vote without winning any of the proofs or having solid evidence that fraud was actually happening. That's the key difference.
That's fair. Lauren, can you, as the resident Trump supporter, provide us the evidence that there was fraud? Because I don't know if that's the case.
In your situation, Destiny, in which you believe that somebody is trying to kill you and then you kill somebody, you would only need to prove that you actually thought that you were in fear of your life. You wouldn't
come on. That's not true.
Hold on, wait, Lauren.
Wait. Focus on that. Focus on that. My understanding is it would have to be a reasonable fear, though. If I went into a bar and I killed somebody because there was a black person there, and I said, no, I'm really scared of black people, that wouldn't fly in court. I would have to prove that there was
Right. We're arguing over whether it's reasonable.
Scared of black people, that doesn't mean that you believe that you're in imminent fear. So now
whoa, you're dead wrong. I totally could feel
that
way. I could walk into a bar and hate black people and say, I really do think I think he saw my Rittenhouse clip and I felt like he was going to kill me, right? I could feel it, but that wouldn't fly in court. I would have to prove more than that.
Possibly would. You'd probably be able to.
No, it wouldn't.
The DGG legal defense.
No shot.
If you had,
wait, why talk about? Hold on, wait. Can I?
To be in reality, to recognize that not every black person is going to shoot you, and you're so insanely.
That's an insanity defense.
I would
That's
imagine
insanity.
that you
That's
would
different.
meet.
This is insane. Wait. Why are we arguing about the hypothetical? Hold on. If the argument. if the
That would be an
argument,
insanity defense, Lauren. If what you're saying is you're actually deluded and you think
Yes,
that you
that's what
have
I'm
like
saying.
no
You're
perception.
actually deluded. Like,
No, but that's not what you're
investment-
But
implying.
hold on.
Right.
Also,
You're
none of us would care if Donald Trump wanted to plead insanity and go be locked up in a mental institution. I think we would all be okay with that. I'd be fine if he wants to do that. But yeah,
That would
you're-
be funny.
Yeah.
hold on. Why argue about the hypothetical, Lauren? Hold on? Tell us. I don't know. Is there reasonable? What was the evidence? What is the best evidence that the Republican side has to offer for that there was reasonable suspicion, reasonable reasons for Donald Trump to suspect there was fraud that would justify depriving the rights? Because exactly what Destiny said, that makes sense that it
justify
wouldn't.
why they believe that there is fraud. Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, that has to do very easy to explain with the whole changing of the electoral process during
Oh my
COVID
God.
to allow mass mail-out ballots.
Whoa! Saying "Oh my God" is not an argument. Okay.
Wait. Actually, more importantly, Lauren is
Wait, I started
completely.
giving-
Lauren
I
is
started
right.
giving concrete
Yes,
examples.
you are right. You gave concrete examples, and Trump was fully within his right, and the states were fully within their right to explore that potential fraud in federal courts and state courts all across the United States, and they did, and they lost. And that's
It's
where it
not
starts and
fraud.
stops.
She's saying
But
that
what
changing
did,
the
how
laws.
did they lose, Destiny? On what basis? It was almost
On
always
some
based
basis,
On
it was
the
because
merits
they
as
didn't have
well, on the
standing.
merits as
On
well.
some basis, it was
never
merits.
based on the merits. It was always based on.
It wasn't always
either
based on
they
the
were
merit- on the
prevented
standing.
because they didn't have a case yet, because they hadn't been grieved yet, because the election hadn't occurred yet, or it was locked out because it was moot because that election had
Yeah,
already
they lost
passed.
on
So
many
they were
different
prevented.
grounds in many different cases.
Hold on, wait. In
Guess
some
what?
of the
It's a-
cases, also, they literally reviewed evidence, because I remember some of these evidences that were thrown on YouTube. For instance, the box of ballots that was mysteriously pulled on the table. There were federal judges that threw these out because once they viewed the full tapes, there was no case. It was obvious that these were brought in earlier. It was literally seen on tape. Not every single case was lost on standing alone.
Also,
You're just
you're
talking about the Georgia case.
No. Stop. There were other evidentiary cases that went to the merits.
What case
in
did they
Arizona and
win?
elsewhere.
What case did they win on the
I
merits,
think you're
Lauren?
only talking about civil suits in which Trump's attorneys were not involved.
What
You're talking
case
about
did they win on
Georgia
the
case
merits?
with
Yeah. Did they win any cases?
mother-daughter situation?
Are there any ongoing cases still?
No.
Did they
So
win
did they
any
win any?
cases, any previous cases on the merits?
I don't think
No.
Did Trump himself have any case on the merits, or did a third party people have
My
cases
Pillow
that
guy.
were eventually
Why does
settled
that?
on the merits?
Why does that matter to you? I mean, like, we're talking now
Because
about the evidence
Trump
of fraud.
himself,
Why does it
he's
matter if
the
they brought it or
aggrieved
not?
party, and he didn't have the opportunity to defend himself with the full
He
power. of his own attorney.
100% did. No, he 100%. But he has to comport with the Constitution too. And don't you agree that standing is a requirement under the Article 3 of the Constitution? That's a requirement.
Yes, standing is a
So-
requirement.
So the judges shouldn't be. They shouldn't. I don't know why you guys live in this world where you just want to break the Constitution whenever it's convenient. If
Because
the
it's
judges
racist.
are, if they swear an oath to uphold the Constitution, that means upholding Article 3. And you want them to what? Skip the Constitution and go right to the merits because they feel like it. Because it's not fair.
No,
to
I don't
not
think
give
that
him-
I don't think they ruled on standing properly in almost any of those cases, and they prevented Trump from ever getting to the merits of the case.
Just take the Texas
on-
case, this absurd Texas case. That the Texas goes directly to the Supreme Court on their original jurisdiction,
I mean,
and they try
I
to.
could have sworn it was in Michigan and Arizona as well.
Well, I'm just giving you one example where it's so obvious. There's no. I mean, there's been
With
so
that,
many
with that
cases.
example, to help Lauren make her case, that example is an outlier. That was the first one, and that was the first one after several failed to apply the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
Oh, sorry. No. I was talking about Article 3 of the Constitution, which is about the standing issue, where I'm sort of pointing out that
Okay.
essentially
But also,
there
if we're
were
talking
cases.
about the insurrection and the
I
14th
would want to
Amendment
go there too,
Constitution.
Chair. That's my inclination as well. And
The complaint is
you
that-
guys still haven't.
A lot of people think that, like, Trump, a lot of people think there was election fraud in a lot of these states, or that the procedures were changed improperly, and that those legal arguments were never tested because the people that were bringing these suits, I think, like, some states, like, I think the state of Texas tried to sue another state for how they changed their procedure.
Yeah.
And the problem was why the fuck should Texas have the right to bring a suit against another state about how they do their election procedure? What is the standing there? And standing is important legally because you can't just have a random person suing a random person or random entity suing a random entity at any point in the United States. They've got to prove prove, what is it? I don't know, injury. They got to prove that
case
they're
or controversy, injury in fact, causation, yeah.
And because a lot of these failed on the standing grounds, now the Trumples can live in this weird world where it's like, oh, well, they absolutely would have won on the merits, but because of this bullshit standing argument, they didn't even get to try their case legally. That's their argument, essentially.
Yeah, Lauren, I believe it was far-right fascist sympathizer Jordan Peterson who even said that all of the evidence that was brought in the court cases most of them were Trump-appointed judges who rejected the court cases. And if it is the case that there was suspicion of fraud and it was investigated in the courts and there was not a single single recognition that there was fraud, then it's looking pretty rough for Trump. I'm not gonna lie. I may have to vote for Biden over Trump.
There's other things that you could look at other than like an actual fraudulent ballot, which would be more difficult to find. I think the actual changing of electoral processes, you could argue, unconstitutionally undermined Trump's
Also,
ability to
you
win.
could make the
wait.
comparison. You could also make the comparison that the Biden crime family is worse than Trump, even if he is guilty on all this.
Facts!
You couldn't, but we're 5 minutes
We
away
should've
from Lauren.
we should've
We're 5
started
minutes
with
away
the-
from Lauren. We are 5
minutes.
minutes away from
Nice
Lauren
meme.
saying it's unconstitutional for a Democrat to win a presidential election. We're 5 minutes
I mean,
away.
that's
from
really
that.
where we're at.
Listen,
I mean,
all you neocons in the pocket of Raytheon, okay? You can sit there and say that this is all nonsense, but Burisma, that's all I'll say. Right, Lauren?
What is up with Burisma? Do you think Hunter Biden knows any? No, I'm just kidding.
Lauren, you
Okay.
point to changes in election law, which are, by the way, totally normal. I don't know. The main one that people cite to is one of the acts in Pennsylvania that was passed in 2019 prior to COVID. People, I don't know why you're saying it's a COVID measure. It was supported by Republicans, state Republicans, and it was passed by the Democratic governor at the time. And so I have no idea and it's been upheld by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court as totally within Pennsylvania law. The independent state legislature theory has been thoroughly
Biden won it.
debunked
Biden
by
won the
Supreme
state.
Court.
I just want to say
there's no basis.
And I just want to say, I hate the games that we play in terms of like, was it constitutional, blah, blah, and because we're all like playing this dumb shit game. The reality is Republicans didn't want mail-in ballots because they knew they would skew Democrat. And at the end of the day, that is the answer for all of the election fraud claims. And I hate it when conservatives pretend it's anything different than that. We had known there's a reason why Trump was claiming like a year before the election that it was going to be fake. The mail-in ballot, were the Democrats' plans already in action and Trump had already foresaw into the future? There's a reason why even Bernie Sanders was on news, I think months before the election, saying things like, we know that the mail-in ballots are going to change things overnight. We know that some states we aren't going to know until the morning. There's a reason why the night of, people were hesitant to call elections. They were like, everybody was waiting for the mail-in ballots to come in. This idea that it was horrible, it was so unconstitutional. What? That they gave more people the opportunity to vote via mail-in ballot? That is a wild claim to
There
make.
were Republican officials openly saying that if we maximize eligible voter turnout, Republicans will never win another election in this country. They know if it becomes a popularity contest, they
Democrats
lose.
don't care about preventing people who are not supposed to vote from voting. That's why Democrats are against signing of ballots. That's why Democrats are against voter ID. That's the main one. They're and mail-out ballot is the most ripe for fraud. So that's why Democrats are pro mail-out ballot. It just seems quite
You could go to the
ridiculous.
Heritage
One
Foundation.
cheat is making all the ways of cheating a lot easier.
And I don't
Maybe if
even-
you
I
could
don't think any
offer
of us-
evidence of cheating,
I don't think any of us
maybe you
even
could offer.
disagree with that. It doesn't seem the worst thing to me to have an ID or whatever. It doesn't seem the worst thing to have signature verification if you really want. I don't see any strong arguments against it other than one should be provided for free.
Far-right destiny.
However, there is a big
Racist.
difference between saying that these things might be more prone to manipulation than other forms of voting and saying like it's almost for sure they were manipulated. There is zero
you
evidence.
skip a
And
step.
why does it seem like every single time ballot fraud or any of this shit comes up, why the is it always Republicans that are the ones doing it? I feel like there were
Because
two or three.
Republicans are the ones who are trying to make the elections more secure by having a single.
No.
Cheating.
That's not what I said.
They're
That's not what I
cheating
said.
to expose flaws in the
Wait,
system.
I'm asking. You misunderstood my question. You misunderstood my question.
No,
you misunderstood my question. I'm asking, why is it the Republicans are the ones that usually get caught trying to cheat ballots? I feel like there were 2 or 3 cases that came up where it was Republicans that were doing it. It wasn't even conservatives. Or I'm sorry, it wasn't even liberals. And when there was finally a big film made showing ballot harvesting, which was the Dinesh dipshit guy or whatever, right?
That's Sousa.
Almost every single video Do you remember the one horrible ballot harvester guy
Is
that he showed?
walking donkey
that
one
was
or whatever?
going, yeah, that was going over and over again to the ballot box, and it was obvious that he was manipulating votes. And then like one day later, people were like, "Oh, he's a nurse and he literally works at this clinic." Or the one black dude that dropped off like 8 ballots and people found out who it was. It was like, "Oh, he literally has like a family of 7 at home." Like every single time conservatives try to find fraud, it's either bullshit or it's them committing it.
Right.
Like
Yep.
I think
Lauren-
it's okay to make the statement that like mail-in ballots might be more prone to manipulation. I think that is a totally fine statement, and I think anybody here would be insane to say otherwise. However, you are equally or more retarded to say that fraud has absolutely happened, but only in the states where Trump lost. Like
I didn't.
Lauren, you should have
Planning for
started
certain
with
states that
Burisma. You
closed
should have
down
started with
DMVs
Burisma, and we could have avoided this whole
Listen,
legal
listen.
nonsense.
I was told not
I
to
love-
talk about words in the beginning.
Yeah,
Insurrection. I want to get there.
I'm sorry if I crippled the argument for
Right.
bringing back Burisma and Biden's cock, but I really appreciate everybody switching your schedule and coming to do this now. I do want to give you guys a closing statement. Shout yourself out. And want to start with, we'll go the opposite direction now. We'll start with Pisco.
Can I just have, before I do my closing statement, I just want to get some statements on the record for our 2 friends here, Paul and Lauren. Do you think that there was an insurrection on January 6th,
No.
2021 or no? No? And
No.
Paul, what about?
This argument has been so fruitful that I am not sure.
wait, where were you at before the argument?
I certainly said no. I was like, of course not, because there's the videos of the protesters being not protesters, rioters
that's
being
good.
let in, all that shit. But again, on the indictment stuff, and I would be very interested to hear an intelligent right-wing lawyer, who I know is a mythical person in your guys' view, but it would be interesting to hear their perspective on it. So, well,
Oh, I'm
yes.
sorry. No, that's
No,
I'm a
What
dick.
am I chopped
No,
fucking
no,
liver?
no,
You
no, 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 no.
Actually not-
We were
that's
friends
actually
before
not
this, we
fair.
no longer are.
That is
She
not.
has made most of the
Okay,
of
I'm
their
not-
arguments this whole panel. She just
Yes.
happens to be solo.
That's okay. That is not. I was not making a dig. My point. You weren't getting dogpiled. You were the. I have no legal training, so and I'm the centrist, so I'm not even technically on your team. I'm on no one's team. I'm like Treebeard. But the lawyers who are close to the actual cases on a case by case basis, because you were talking about the Texas case getting thrown away on its standards versus its merits, which I don't even fully understand. I think you would have to look at it on an individual case-by-case basis. Yes, Lauren obviously is
Thank
the
you.
only person here who put up any sort of fight whatsoever
Well,
against
still
the
love you, enlightened centrist.
far
but I do
left
want Pisco to finish
commies.
his closing
Yeah,
statement.
sure. First of all, thanks to Lauren and Paul for being good sports. I know that I came on you hard and no hard feelings whatsoever. You guys both seem like fine people. And
You did come on me hard.
So, my bad, my bad. So it's for me, it's 100% clear that the 14th Amendment is in force, that it's self-executing, and that it applies to Donald Trump's conduct. If you look at the historical definitions for what an insurrection is, for what a rebellion is, it absolutely fits in Trump's conduct. And, put aside all the stuff about the speech he gave at the Ellipse. Put aside that he is the foundation, the intellectual and moral foundation for this entire event at January 6th. Put aside the statements that he's making to others, the conspiracies that he's being charged with. Put all that aside, even the bad faith elector scheme. Put all that to the side. Put yourself in Trump's shoes when there's an insurrection happening at the Capitol. Trump has a stop insurrection button at his disposal. At any time, right? He could press that button and stop what's going on in our Capitol. And the law usually abhors affirmative duties, but Trump took an oath to defend and support the U.S. Constitution. And the fact that he did not press that button and stop the insurrection as soon as it started, absolutely, if it's not engaging in insurrection or a rebellion, it is giving aid or comfort to those who are engaging in insurrection or rebellion. Imagine that you were in Fort Sumter and you were the general of the garrison in Fort Sumter, and you could press a button that could get everyone to stop and get them all to leave Fort Sumter alone, and you didn't press it. Do you think it would be the most obvious case at the time that person was giving aid or comfort to insurrectionists and people who are committing rebellion? We can go into further detail at later times about the actual mechanics and procedures. There's going to be judicial review of all this. Destiny laid out a parade of horribles that he doesn't fully understand, and I'm hoping in further conversations with him I can sort of assuage some of his fears. But absolutely, he should be disqualified, and I'm glad to see that certain secretaries of states are taking their constitutional responsibilities seriously and starting to implement those procedures and starting to seriously consider their duties under the Constitution.
And where can people find you?
Pisco on Twitter.
Thank you.
What-
PFJung.
Quick clarification. What's the button you're referring to?
I know facts. I was going to mention that.
He- oh, so-
Hypothetical. No. Closing statements.
Okay.
Don't care about your button. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay. Pisco's is invalidated because he didn't define the button.
Fair.
What do I think? I think that there are 70 million some potential Trump voters. I think it's important to understand their perspective. I think it's also important to understand the far left perspective and all that stuff. I'm not comfortable saying if you vote for Trump or you're thinking about voting for Trump, you're a terrible person, you're a fascist. I think that's going too far. However, as I learn more about this, because again, I see videos of, things, the Dinesh D'Souza, walking donkeys or the mule thing or whatever. It's like, yeah, 1,000 Mules. It's like, okay, I never watched it. I suspect it's bullshit. The way that Destiny just described it sounds like it's probably bullshit. So now I'm, slightly less on the maybe we should vote for Trump train. Although we didn't get to the other side of the equation, which is, given all this, even if Trump has done all this, is he potentially a better candidate still than Biden? And that will have to be another
You're
time.
gonna lose your centrist title. Where can people find you?
PFJung, Jung, on YouTube.
Awesome. And Josiah.
So I think that as a matter of constitutionality, Trump is definitely disqualified, is probably in addition to a number of other Republicans for attempts to steal the 2020 election and participation in January 6th. I do think that even if you want to say that he did not engage in insurrection, although I think the case can be made, he certainly gave aid and comfort, as Pisco said. We used to believe in this country that with great power comes great responsibility, and Donald Trump was the sitting president of the United States, the most powerful person in the world, therefore the most responsibility to behave a certain way, and he failed. And the centrists and the conservatives on this panel would never have accepted a counterfactual in which President Obama did the same thing that Trump did, so you should apply the same standard. And I look forward to seeing this potentially litigated. You can find me at youtube.com/@ponderingpolitics, one word.
Thank you. And Lauren De Laguna.
Hey, so if Trump engaged in an insurrection, first of all, I didn't know about the magic button that could have airlifted all of the protesters right out of there. But I do know of a agency called Secret Service, and I'm aware of other agencies in which Trump, 2 days prior to January 6th, so on January 4th, informed Marion Bowser, the Washington, D.C. Mayor, and informed Nancy Pelosi that he would like more people at the Capitol to protect it on the date of January 6th, knowing that there were a lot of protesters there. Furthermore, he said during his speech that he wanted the protesters' voices to be peacefully heard. Make your voices peacefully heard. And he specifically used the word peacefully. I think it would be a matter of having to determine for a fact, beyond a reasonable doubt, that he was engaged in insurrection if you want to prevent him from running for office. As for the judge who ruled against the man in Texas, the commissioner in Texas, keeping his position based off the charges of trespassing, I would say that he has a case to go to the appellate division. I don't think that the judge ruled accurately in that decision. That's why we have an appellate division in the first place. And Trump is, in my opinion, not guilty of insurrection. The election was bullshit. 2,000 Mules is a whatever movie. It's not that bad as Destiny's making it out to be, even though there were a few issues with it. And Trump 2024, if not Vivek, if not DeSantis. All right, and you can find me at Lauren De Laguna on the YouTubes, on the Instagrams, and on Twitter.
Awesome, thank you. And the white liberal Destiny.
Yeah, Trump is a fascist. If you support him, you support fascism. You might be too ignorant of what that means to realize it, but that is absolutely the case. Donald Trump sat in his office seething, not lifting a finger to do anything when the riots were happening, because secretly we all know that Donald Trump hoped they would have succeeded. He hoped they would have overthrown the election results. He hoped that he could have capitalized on that chaos to install himself as president for at least another month or two while he found other ways to subvert the process. I think everybody in here knows that that's absolutely what happened. And I think that the most exciting thing past President Biden winning his re-election is going to be Pisco figuring out how to answer a fucking question without rambling for 15 minutes with irrelevant bullshit while he tries to scramble through his brain to figure out a way to non-answer the question that was given to him. And I look forward to that day finally happening.
Awesome. And do you want to shout out anything? Like your show that's happening next?
I want to shout out Chaeiry for tolerating my bullshit, because I double booked today because I was in New York and I didn't move my keeper kick thing. And then when I checked my keeper kick thing that we've got a ton of big people booked for, I had to move it to today. And I promised
I don't
Chaeiry
need you to kiss my
that I was
ass.
going to.
Just
I'm not
shout out
kissing.
your keeper kick. That took my time. That's what I want.
Fuck all of you. But fuck Pisco the most.
Everyone can stay tuned, because next, when my panel was supposed to start right now, it's going to be kick or keep. Thank you all for coming. Tomorrow I'm going to be on Sitch and Adam, and I am now an enlightened centrist and an anti-fan. Okay.
Be careful, don't trigger
guys.
them too hard, because they'll tweet about you for 7 weeks. So.
No.
We're bringing the enlightened centrists
I don't lie about
everywhere.
them, so.
Okay. Wow.
Okay,
I love
bye,
y'all
guys.
very much.
Thanks, Chaeiry. That was a lot of
Thank you
fun.
guys for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Chaeiry.
I think I shake it.
Oh, look who it
record on our
is.
end, right? Do we have to record on our end, Destiny, or do you handle it all?
No, I got all this. Why would I make you record on my end like a lazy podcast host that doesn't know how to manage his own shit? Who does that?
Hey, man, I don't.
Lazy podcast host.
Where's the turkey loser? Is he in here?
He's late to the gym. He's about to be in.
Yeah, right. Okay.
He does, yeah.
Swear to God.
He pretends to work out here.
Where are you at?
Tom's put on like 40 pounds of muscle in the past like 6 months.
Has he? That's scary, bro.
Just because he wanted to not be a twink anymore, he said. Ask him
Oh, I
about
thought you meant you.
Does he still wear
me?
the nail polish?
But you're a twink.
Yeah, I'm
You're
still
still
twinked
actively
up.
a twink.
Brandon, are you
I'm
coming at
acting-
us
boxing?
like? Is this? Are you dreaming right now, or what's going on with your lens, buddy?
I'll be honest, I'm having some technical difficulties. Is there like, am I just being retarded, or is...
Bro, your
No,
microphone's
like that
probably
camera.
set to manual focus. Check the thing. Check the side of the lens. You might have to
So
switch it to
unplug
A.
it.